A very long time ago, inside a castle, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the halls as Lyle Carmaine entered the room. Awaiting him was the one known as the Vampire Lord, Dean Nosferatu, who acknowledged that Lyle had done well to arrive. Lyle drew his sword, recognizing that this was where Nosferatu had been all along. Nosferatu studied him in silence, noting how unrefined Lyle appeared for an adventurer, though he also observed the remarkable quality of the holy blade in Lyle's hands. Nosferatu had already anticipated this moment and had made his preparations. He let out a mocking laugh, belittling Lyle as nothing more than an underling of the Elysium Temple, pointing out his trembling and ridiculing him for not living up to the image of a hero. Lyle stood there, stunned. Nosferatu continued, criticizing the way Lyle held his sword and his poor stance, questioning how someone like him could possibly defeat a superior demon lord like Dean Nosferatu. Dean then urged Lyle to step forward, declaring that he would face him with his full strength. Lyle's hands trembled as he gripped the sword. Dean noticed and questioned his fear. Lyle muttered under his breath before suddenly snapping, throwing the sword away. Frustration poured out of him as he demanded an end to what he saw as a ridiculous act, questioning the situation and pressing Nosferatu for answers, insisting that the entire scenario be stopped. He then questioned why he was the one who had to carry out the killing. Dean paused, letting out a quiet sigh, urging him to stop breaking down. Dean instructed him to pick up the sword and repeat the actions as they had practiced. He made it clear that what had been decided could not be undone. For Lyle to gain recognition from the Elysium Temple, he, as the village chief, had to be the one to defeat the superior Dark Lord who bore the titles of Lord of Nosferatu and Vampire Lord. Lyle reacted with anger, challenging the title of Vampire Lord and pointing out that Dean had never even consumed blood. Dean responded calmly, urging him to settle down. Dean had never claimed to be a vampire. However, it was undeniable that he was not human. Even he could not explain his own origin. At some point, he had simply come into existence and wandered the world. His blood carried an overwhelming amount of magic power, far beyond that of any human, drawing in the magic that flowed through the world itself. Because of this, he neither aged nor succumbed to illness. Through his own experiments with magic and his blood, others had come to label him as a vampire. Dean recalled the time when villagers urged one another to drive him out of an abandoned house within their territory, suspecting that he was a vampire. For 50 years, he was treated as a monster, chased away and left to wander. During that long stretch of time, there were no peaceful memories for him to hold onto. After wandering for so long, he eventually came across a castle in a place like this. He wondered if no one was living there and considered settling down within it. He also thought about how the nearby villagers would react to his presence. To his surprise, the carefree villagers were pleased that someone would finally live in the old castle, and the idea sounded good to them. Those same villagers accepted Dean without hesitation, even going as far as making a chair that resembled a throne for him. From that point on, he spent 150 years experimenting in peace. Over time, he came to be regarded as the protective deity of the village. It was clear, as Lyle recognized, that Dean had never done anything harmful. He had always been their protector, a father-like figure who never aged. To them, he was family, their lord, and also their teacher. Lyle could not understand why Dean needed to die. Dean urged him to stop breaking down, reminding him that he was the first son of the village head. All of this had only come to pass because of the disease. If it had not appeared, none of this would have happened. 1 year earlier, in the royal capital, the disease began to spread. Dark marks appeared across the body, and no matter what was done, the fever only worsened. The great holy knight of the Elysium Temple reassured the people, telling them there was no need to fear as long as they believed in the temple. They were instructed that to cure the disease, they needed faith and repentance, and that doing so would wash away the darkness from their bodies. They were told to drink holy water, as an illness like this would be cured immediately. However, reports soon reached the great holy knight that the number of infections continued to rise. Multiple regions were being affected by the same disease, and those infected were dying one after another. The death toll had already surpassed 10,000, and there was no longer enough space to bury the dead. Upon hearing this, the great holy knight reacted with anger, striking his hand down as he struggled to understand what was happening, questioning why none of the measures were working and what the true origin of the disease could be. There was still one more detail to consider. In the Regent's Gorge, there was a village called Fira, and no deaths had been reported there. From Dean's observation, it was clear that the illness spreading in the royal capital was none other than Shinmonbyu. The parent of an infected child struggled to accept it, recalling how countless people in the capital had died in a short time. Fear spread as they considered the possibility that the same disease could reach their village. Dean reassured them, explaining that he had examined preventive methods based on past epidemics. At the same time, he quietly reflected that he had never encountered something like this before. The people in this area had little contact with the royal capital, leading him to suspect that the disease might have been brought in by messengers or runners. He then instructed that anyone suspected of being infected should be brought to his castle. Since he was not affected by human diseases, he could take care of them himself. Outside the castle, Dean gathered everyone and made sure they understood the situation. He explained that this kind of epidemic was usually airborne, and even someone with a slight fever could spread it. He emphasized the importance of thoroughly washing their hands. Dean then distributed filter masks made from Ranamara grass, reminding everyone to wear them frequently to help purify the air they breathed and to replace them every day. Not long after, Lyle approached Dean with urgency, informing him that his daughter, Alice, had been infected. They quickly brought her to the castle. Dean checked on Alice's condition. She looked at him as he reassured her that she would be fine and would not die. Alice responded with a faint sense of relief. Her condition, however, was more severe than that of the others. Dean regarded her as a resident of Fira village, someone who, to him, could not be replaced, and he had already come to see her as part of his family. Even for Dean, who had lived for 200 years, death was still something that had to be faced. It became even more difficult when it involved someone he considered family. The Mistal blood, his own blood, could be used as a medium for magic and also held purifying properties. He gave his blood to Alice, and through that act, he was able to save the village from Shimanbu. However, the situation did not end there. The Great Holy Knight spoke to Lyle, the village chief, claiming understanding while stating that the being known as the Lord of Nosferatu had influenced their village. Afterward, one of the men questioned the identity of the Lord of Nosferatu, wondering if it was truly that monster. The Great Holy Knight affirmed it, referring to records from a few hundred years ago that contained eyewitness accounts. That being had been called the Vampire Lord and the Solitary Demon Lord, described as one who drinks blood and manipulates magic, a terrifying existence. Yet, to them, discovering him was considered a blessing. When asked what that meant, the Great Holy Knight explained that it was good news. The Shimanbu that had been spreading among humans was being attributed to the Demon Lord, and this information needed to be made known to the public. Later, Lyle struck the table in anger, cursing the news. He realized that those from the Elysium Temple were deliberately spreading claims that their lord was the cause of the Shimanbu disease. The official scroll stated that the residents of Fira village were under the influence of his black magic, which was why they had avoided the disease. Lyle understood what that meant. When he had spoken to them about Dean, they had told him that if he wished to deny the testimony, he must take up the holy sword and kill Dean Nosferatu. Only then would the innocence of Fira village be recognized, as decreed by the royal family. Lyle, driven by desperation, asked Dean if there was any possible solution to the Shimanbu. Dean responded that if that was the case, then Lyle should kill him. The words left Lyle stunned. Dean continued, explaining that the village was now bound by the decree and that both of them shared the same desire to protect it. Dean gently patted Lyle, telling him that by defeating him, the so-called Demon Lord, he would gain the trust of the Elysium Temple before they could act themselves. He made this request to Lyle not as a lord, but as the chief of Freya village. Lyle broke down, unable to accept why he had to be the one to take his lord's life. He thought about his daughter and questioned what he was supposed to tell Alice, knowing that she had always spoken about wanting to become Dean's bride. Dean reminded him that she was still young, and that when she grew older, Lyle should find her a human husband. Lyle pleaded for Dean to escape, insisting that the Elysium Temple was not something they could deceive so easily. If they began pursuing him, they would surely stand in his way and try to stop them. Dean explained that the Elysium Temple held control over ancient magic and ancient artifacts, gathering enough power to build overwhelming forces. With that strength, they had secured their position among royalty and nobility. Even if he were no match for them, Dean questioned how much longer Lyle could stand against such power. In the end, he made it clear that it was better for Lyle to be the one to kill him. Time quickly ran out as the Holy Knights of Elysium began pounding on the door. When they forced their way inside, they declared their intent to purge him. Lyle, still wavering, raised his sword. Dean gave the signal to act. He then moved toward Lyle, testing his resolve, as if asking whether he truly believed he could win against him. With no other choice left, Lyle forced his sword forward, piercing through Dean's body. Dean noted the pain, remarking that it was sharper than expected. For Dean, living alongside humans had not been a bad experience at all. He had never fathered any children, but having something that resembled a family had been enough for him. He expressed that Lyle had gone through great trouble for his sake and urged him not to let it be wasted. Lyle accepted that responsibility. Soon after, Dean pushed Lyle away and acknowledged him in a manner fitting of a hero. The pain spread through Dean's body, making him realize that perhaps he was not truly immortal. He remained still, waiting, knowing there was still something left for Lyle to complete. Lyle then declared that the evil magician Dean Nosferatu had been defeated, raising his sword as the village chief, Lyle Carmaine, who had brought him down. The Holy Knights nearby praised Lyle for his actions. From Dean's perspective, Lyle had done well, and his own role had come to an end. What followed would now depend entirely on Lyle. He briefly thought about his familiar bat, wondering if it was still nearby. He had anticipated an outcome like this and had prepared a backup plan, intending to transfer his soul into the bat. His body began to give way as he collapsed, realizing that things were not going as expected. He had not thought death would come this quickly, and he was unable to carry out the transfer of his consciousness. It seemed that he had failed. He had not managed to conceal his existence, and in the end he had been discovered by a powerful organization, leading to this outcome. There was a lingering thought that he had failed again. If only he had revealed himself to more humans earlier, perhaps Lyle and the others would not have been dragged into this situation. With those thoughts, Dean closed his eyes, ready to depart. Then, after a brief moment, a voice reached him, offering him the chance to reincarnate, stating that he had fulfilled the conditions to do so and asking if he wished to live in this world once more. He responded with a faint willingness, and the decision was made. The voice began to fade, though it was unclear whether it was the voice itself or Dean's consciousness that was slipping away. It was said that he would be reincarnated as a human, marking a continuation rather than an end. Dean felt as though Lyle had accepted this outcome, though even then he was not entirely certain. That memory, all of it, belonged to his previous life, which he suddenly recalled upon reaching his 10th birthday. Dean recalled the voice that had once asked him whether he wished to reincarnate. Even now, he still wondered what that voice truly meant at the time. Ever since he regained the memories of Dean Nosferatu 3 years ago, he had gradually become used to carrying both his current life's memories and those from his past. He had lived 13 years in this current body, while his former life had spanned 200 years, and he had come to accept both as part of himself. He was once Dean Nosferatu, the Lord of Nosferatu, and now he existed as the second son of a baron. In this life, the boy was known as Yuki Grosseria. He remembered that after being killed by Lyle, he had intended to transfer his soul into his bat familiar. To make that possible, he had taken time to let the bat grow accustomed to his blood and had even prepared spells for the process. In the end, it had failed completely. Still, he refused to accept it as anything more than inexperience, considering it was his first time attempting such a spell and that he had never faced death before. He accepted that failure was unavoidable. After the spell had failed, he heard that voice, and then his consciousness faded. When awareness returned, he had been reborn as a human. Curiosity remained as he wondered who had reincarnated him and how much time had passed since then. The territory of the Baron where he now lived was far from the royal capital, a place that could only be described as the countryside. The head of the Grosseria family had taken him in as an illegitimate child. George Grosseria was his father, with Zeros as the elder brother and Rumia as the younger sister. Including him, Yuki, there were 4 members in the family. Yuki was not born from the late legitimate wife of the household, and because of that he held no right to inherit. This left him needing to decide his future path, whether to choose a school upon leaving or to become an adventurer. Before making that choice, he recognized that he first needed to understand humans more deeply. Reflecting on his previous life, Yuki realized that he had failed to fully integrate into human society. Before settling in the castle, he had been driven away as a monster. Later, he became the guardian deity of Fira village, and in the end, that path had led to his death. At present, he was not entirely human. His abilities from his previous life still remained within him. His blood was still Mistal blood, and as he continued to grow, there would come a time when he would stop aging altogether. This time, he resolved to live while pretending to be human. As a child, he would have the chance to study many things, and by the time his aging stopped, he would have learned enough to blend naturally into human society. Yuki decided that he would use his magic to achieve that goal. Not long after, a small and rather cute bat appeared at his window. Yuki wondered if it had come from the mountains. Thinking about it, bats had always been drawn to him, and because of that, he had once been labeled as the Lord of Vampires. Yuki picked up his dagger, feeling that the timing was right. He turned his attention to the bat, considering whether it would take part in an experiment. He made a small cut on his index finger, letting a bit of blood flow, knowing that it was Mistal blood filled with magic power. He then offered it to the bat, understanding that if it drank the blood, it would become his kin and gain wisdom. The bat moved forward and licked the small drop of blood from his finger. Almost immediately, the bat experienced a change and reacted with visible excitement. It expressed its gratitude for the encounter and for receiving a portion of that power, now able to speak as a result. The bat lowered its head, showing its willingness to be useful and serve. Yuki acknowledged this, noting that he himself had only recently begun to awaken to his abilities again. Those who received his blood had the potential to become his valet. However, it required agreement from both sides, making it less of a forced control and more of an exchange, where he would grant a portion of his power in return for assistance. Yuki mentioned to the bat that it might be a little early and wondered if there was a place where they could test magic. The bat suggested a mountain where it lived and cautioned that they needed to be careful, as monsters occasionally appeared there. Yuki asked what kind of monsters could be found. The bat described creatures such as dark bears, night screech birds, and rage rabbits. Yuki considered it and concluded that if it was only those, then it would not be a problem. Just outside his room, the sound of small footsteps approached. Rumia stood at the door and knocked. She had come to tell him that it was time to eat, taking it upon herself instead of leaving it to Martha. Yuki wondered if she had once again come all the way from the main building and reminded her that Zeros had told her not to wander off like that. Rumia explained that she wanted to check on how Yuki had been as they made their way to the dining hall. Rumia spoke first, going over her daily routine. She would wake up in the morning, eat breakfast, and prepare for school for the common folk, spending time reading a few books. Yuki then shared his own routine, describing how he had been taught swordsmanship by their father before Zeros took over the training. After lunch, he practiced using a wooden sword, and that had been his day so far. As Rumia listened, she began to feel uneasy and remarked that Yuki should be more considerate of a woman's feelings. When Yuki asked if she was upset, she quickly denied it. Yuki then extended his hand, offering to walk with her. Rumia accepted, and they continued together. As they walked, Yuki's attention shifted to the strong wind outside. He noted how powerful it was in that area and recalled that the building had already existed even before their father established the Grosseria household. He began to wonder if there might be some kind of magic that could help with that. Rumia responded that having something like that would be nice. Yuki considered it and wondered if the elder brother from the Lindobear Magic Guild might have something similar. The Lindobear Magic Guild was both a magic school and a research institute, forming a large organization that ensured the continued enrollment of royalty and upper-class nobles. Those who enrolled were regarded as nobility, and the trainees were taught powerful ancient magic. Yuki found himself interested, yet the mention of ancient magic reminded him of the Elysium Temple, and he had no desire to get involved with anything related to it. Lost in his thoughts, he failed to notice Rumia calling out to him. When he realized, he apologized and admitted that his attention had drifted, asking her to repeat what she had been saying. Rumia then shared that she had managed to remember what she studied that day and wanted him to listen. Time passed as Yuki spent it with Rumia, going through her poetry pronunciation practice. The pronunciation was essential for casting magic, and the poems they used had remained unchanged since long ago. Yuki reflected that he should not dwell on his previous life. He remembered how he had once taught the children in that village. Although he had died in a throne room, it had felt no different from a classroom. At some point, the village's knowledge level had reached its peak. After a while, Yuki told Rumia that their time was up and that he needed to head to his own dining hall, while she should return to the main building's dining hall. Rumia became downcast, wishing to eat together with him, but Yuki made it clear that it was not possible, something she already understood. Nearby, another voice intervened, pointing out that such behavior was inappropriate. It was stated that it was troubling for someone like Rumia to act selfishly, and that she should be mindful of her place, as position was important for those involved in magic. The man before them was Kachel Mijen, someone their father had hired for the purpose of Zeros's enrollment into the guild. His presence made Rumia uneasy, and fear could be seen in her reaction. Kachel addressed Yuki, explaining that he might not fully understand, but people were born with a fixed social status. Yuki responded calmly, showing that he was already aware of such structures. He laid out the ranking according to species, placing humans at the top, followed by elves and then beastmen. He also mentioned that intelligent monsters had their own hierarchy, with liches and vampires at the highest level, followed by others. Kachel fell silent for a moment, clearly taken aback by the response. After regaining his composure, he shifted the topic and asked about the ranking within a noble household. Yuki answered without hesitation, explaining that in the Grosseria family, the highest position belonged to the head of the family, their father. Next was the legitimate wife, regarded as the mother, followed by the elder brother Zeros, then Rumia. Beneath all of them were the illegitimate children, including himself, Yuki Grosseria. Kachel pointed out that there was a mistake in that explanation. He emphasized that an illegitimate child should not even carry the family name. Yuki responded with calm composure, offering an apology for any perceived disrespect. From behind him, Rumia stepped forward to support her brother, insisting that Kachel correct himself, affirming that Yuki was indeed her brother and a rightful member of the Grosseria family. Kachel then turned his attention to Zeros and questioned him directly, asking whether that claim was true. Zeros showed visible unease. Yuki, noticing this, quietly wished that his brother would not be put on the spot. Kachel pressed further, directing the question again to Zeros as the legitimate child of the noble family, asking for his opinion and whether he had already forgotten the proper order. Under pressure, Zeros gave his answer, stating that an illegitimate child was no different from a commoner by blood. He declared that it was unacceptable for a noble to share the same table with them, as it would go against their status. In his view, nobles needed to maintain that level of awareness. Kachel responded with a satisfied expression, presenting Zeros' words as confirmation. Rumia reacted with clear anger at what had just been said. Yuki gently patted Rumiya on the back, guiding her with a calm presence as he made it clear that she needed to head to her own dining room. He reminded her to be careful not to eat where he would be, as he planned to take his meal at a different table with Martha. Rumiya continued forward, tears forming as she accepted what had been said and moved along with Kachel and Zeros. As they were leaving, Yuki raised one final question to Sir Kachel. He brought up the Elysium Temple, specifically asking about the time when they had discovered ancient magic artifacts and how many years had passed since then. Kachel's expression tightened with anger at the mention. The name of the Elysium Temple was treated as something forbidden. Yuki reacted with surprise at the sudden shift. Kachel, after a brief moment, steadied himself and chose to respond. He stated that it had been 220 years since the discovery made by Elysium. He added that giving such an answer was an act of mercy, implying that asking such a question elsewhere would be considered deeply improper. With that, Yuki was left alone, reflecting on what he had just learned. The fact that the Elysium Temple was treated as taboo stood out to him, making it clear that the world he had awakened into was still filled with unknowns. After finishing his meal, Yuki expressed his appreciation for the food, finding it satisfying and wishing there had been a little more. The woman beside him explained that it was simply what had been left over from the main building. That woman was Martha, a maid who lived apart from the main mansion and took care of Yuki. Stepping outside, Yuki noticed his father and Rumiya. Rumiya was practicing her magic, carefully reciting a chant as she formed a small sphere of lightning. Their father, George Grosseria, observed her progress and acknowledged that she had improved, noting how well she could now perform the chant. Rumiya, having put in the effort, continued with quiet confidence, though she remained aware that there were others capable of even greater feats. From where he stood, Yuki watched and recognized that Rumiya's hard work was beginning to show results. George then demonstrated his own ability, activating lightning magic and producing a much larger and more powerful display. Yuki observed that both the chants and their effects had not changed since the past. They had neither improved nor declined. It had already been 220 years since the Elysium Temple's discovery. He began to piece together the timeline, realizing that around 200 years had passed since his death. The Elysium Temple had discovered ancient magic and artifacts 220 years ago, and he himself had died 20 years after that event. That meant 2 full centuries had passed since his previous life ended. With that understanding, he accepted that Lyle and Alice were no longer alive. He let out a quiet sigh, recognizing that nothing could be done about it, though it was still difficult to fully accept. Even so, many things remained unchanged. The name of the country had shifted over time, yet the structure of common magic and its grammar stayed the same. Society itself had not undergone significant change either. Yuki would have expected this era to feel closer to his own, but instead, the system remained familiar. Even now, ancient magic was restricted to a select few, mostly those of higher status. That was why Kachel displayed it with such pride. His brother, Zeros, was also preparing to join the Magic Guild. Yuki began to wonder what had taken place over the past 200 years and came to the decision that he needed to find out for himself. The Elysium Temple had fallen from grace and was now regarded as something taboo, and he wanted to understand the reason behind it. At the same time, he had no desire to encounter those people again. There was a library in the main building, and Yuki thought that he might be able to uncover some answers there. However, he quickly remembered that, as an illegitimate child, he had no right to enter the main building freely. If he wanted access, he would need to come up with a plan. He then considered that he should experiment with his own abilities, as doing so could help him carry out that plan. At the same time, he felt like eating meat, since his dinner earlier had not included any. While testing his magic, he decided it would also be a good opportunity to go hunting. Before that, he thought it would be best to review his own abilities and check his status. Normally, his status remained hidden, but once he entered school, it would likely be examined. His true status revealed that he was 13 years old, with his race listed as unknown. His endurance, strength, and dexterity were ranked at B, his agility at A, and his magic at S. His skills included float, mistal blood, conceal presence, ice magic, follower contract, comprehend language, as well as erosion and purification. After reviewing them, he considered that it should be sufficient. Later that night, he quietly stepped out through his window and activated his flight ability, allowing his body to float as if weightless. The guards did not notice his movement, and his concealment ability seemed to be working effectively. He decided that he would return before morning. Yuki continued onward until he reached the mountain. There, the small bat greeted him with visible excitement, having anticipated his arrival. Yuki directed the bat to lead him to a suitable place where he could practice his magic and hunt animals. Before doing so, the bat asked for his master's name. Yuki gave his name and then asked the bat for its own, only to find that it did not have one. The bat then requested to be given a name. Yuki thought for a moment before coming up with a simple suggestion, asking if the name Dick would be acceptable. Dick showed clear happiness after receiving his name, expressing gratitude and accepting it as a good one. Yuki explained that it was the name of someone from his past, a figure he remembered as a father. That memory led him back to his previous life, where Dick had once thanked him, Dean, for having lived a fulfilling life and had entrusted him with a final request, to look after his son, Lyle. The bat then pointed out how young Yuki appeared now. Yuki brushed that aside, choosing not to focus on such details, and instead asked what kind of prey could be found in the area. From above the trees, they spotted a target, a large rabbit. The bat observed that such creatures were extremely cautious. Yuki recalled that their horns and kicks were strong, making them dangerous in close combat. He decided that he would not engage directly and instead chose to test his magic. Dick raised a concern about using fire, noting that flames would be too bright and wind-based attacks would create too much noise. Yuki reassured him that this would not be an issue, as his specialty was ice magic. He placed his hand against a tree and activated a freezing net. Ice began to spread downward along the trunk, reaching the ground and quickly catching the large rabbit's foot. The creature attempted to escape, but the freezing effect secured it in place. Yuki recognized that his magic was well suited for traps and stealth. It produced neither sound nor light, allowing targets to be captured before they could react. As the immobilized rabbit was drawn closer by the freezing vines, Yuki lifted his dagger and ended it with a single strike. Afterward, he hung the rabbit, allowing the blood to drain. Dick reacted with excitement, recognizing how impressive Yuki's magic was and admitting that even he would not be able to escape from something like that. Yuki regarded it as nothing more than simple magic, but Dick continued to see its value, noting that it produced neither light nor sound, making it nearly impossible for prey to detect. In environments like the mountains, it was an exceptionally effective form of magic for survival. Even so, Yuki acknowledged that it still could not compare to ancient magic. Memories from his past resurfaced, recalling the ancient magic used by the Elysium Temple. A scene played clearly in his mind, where two thieves begged for their lives before a priest, promising never to steal again. Despite their pleas, the priest carried out a spell without hesitation, ending their lives. To the priest, those who disrupted the order of society could not be spared. It was in that moment that Dean Nosferatu had witnessed an entire group of bandits being eliminated effortlessly. Ordinary magic required incantations and the channeling of magical energy to function. Yuki's ice magic, though simplified, could still be used repeatedly with efficiency. Ancient magic, however, was on a different level. It could be cast in succession without even consuming magic, and those who wielded it were known for their relentless combat ability. That was the reason why, in his previous life as Dean Nosferatu, he had chosen not to oppose the Elysium Temple. Yuki reflected that if he had possessed greater power back then, Lyle would not have been forced into the position of having to kill him. In this generation, ancient magic was controlled by the Magic Guild. From what he had seen, especially through someone like Kachel, it was an organization Yuki had no desire to become involved with. His thoughts were interrupted when Dick called out, informing him that his allies had located another large rabbit. Yuki paused at that, questioning the mention of allies. Dick explained that after speaking about his master, many others had shown interest in joining. Looking up, Yuki saw numerous bats flying above him. A small smile formed as he found the sight impressive. Dick expressed his intention for the others to understand just how remarkable his master was. With excitement, Dick shared that his allies were familiar with everything happening across the mountain. If Yuki wished to take control of the area, all he needed to do was give the word. Yuki reached out and gently patted Dick, expressing his appreciation for his reliability. Dick felt honored to receive such acknowledgement. With this, Yuki realized that he now had full awareness of the mountain's movements. The timing felt right, and he began to consider the mountain as his base of operations. He then instructed Dick to select a few bats to serve as direct contacts. If there were monsters too strong for Dick to handle, or if hostile forces or intruders appeared, they were to report it to him. When that time came, he would step in and use his power. Dick accepted the task with gratitude and then guided Yuki toward the location of another large rabbit. Yuki reviewed his abilities once more: Mistle Blood, Float, Conceal Presence, Ice Magic, Follower Contract, and Comprehend Language, and confirmed that he could use them all effectively. With these abilities, he intended to continue living as if he were an ordinary human. As he prepared to hunt further, he wondered how much more he could gather before returning home, knowing that all of this was part of his plan to eventually gain access to the main building. After that night, Yuki returned to the mansion, where Kachel was waiting. His presence made it clear that he was questioning what Yuki had been doing. Kachel addressed him formally, calling him Lord Yuki. Yuki responded in kind, acknowledging him as Sir Kachel, while quietly thinking that this reaction was expected. Yuki explained that he had gone hunting. He stated that he had brought back the prey he caught using traps he had set in the mountain and that he intended to have Martha prepare it for him. Kachel reacted sharply, questioning how he could act in such a way. Yuki calmly explained that he lived far from the main mansion and rarely had the chance to eat meat, so he simply wanted to treat himself. Kachel criticized him, calling his actions selfish and reminding him of his status. He emphasized that, as an illegitimate child, Yuki was no different from a servant. From that perspective, when a servant hunted, the proper conduct would be to present the prey to their master. He insisted that Yuki should learn to behave like the other servants. Yuki turned away from him and continued walking, stating that he wanted to have the meat processed and asking to be excused. Kachel raised his voice in frustration, unwilling to let the matter end there. At that moment, Lord George approached and asked about the situation. Upon seeing Yuki, he showed a warm reaction and asked where he had been. Yuki answered that he had gone hunting in the mountains. Before the explanation could settle, Kachel interrupted, urging Lord George to listen and pointing out that Yuki intended to keep the prey for himself. Lord George responded by stating that if Yuki had caught the prey, then it belonged to him. He acknowledged the 2 large rabbits Yuki had brought back and recognized the achievement, noting that catching such creatures required skill and courage. He expressed that Yuki showed clear talent. Yuki responded with gratitude toward his father. Lord George had earned his noble status through his mastery of martial arts. Even now, he continued his training without neglect, yet still found time to acknowledge Yuki's efforts. For Yuki, who had never known a father figure in his previous life, there was a growing sense of appreciation toward Lord George. Lord George reminded Yuki not to push himself too far, noting that the mountain was filled with dangerous beasts. Kachel, however, remained dissatisfied and voiced his disapproval. He rejected the idea of praising what he saw as selfish behavior from an illegitimate child like Yuki, questioning whether such a response was appropriate for an aristocrat. Lord George saw no issue in it. From his perspective, his child had gone out, hunted, and successfully brought back wild animals, and he found nothing wrong with acknowledging that effort. Kachel responded by reminding him of the terms under which he had been hired. He emphasized that his role was to do everything necessary to ensure that Lord Zeros would gain entry into the Lindbell Magic Guild. In return, Lord George had agreed not to interfere with his methods of instruction. He pressed the point, asking if that had not been their agreement. Lord George acknowledged that it was true. He accepted the reminder and expressed his understanding, deciding that he would withdraw and return to the royal capital. At that moment, Yuki stepped forward, acknowledging that he was at fault. He admitted that he lacked a proper understanding of his position and discipline. With that, he presented the 2 large rabbits he had caught to his father. He then requested permission to enter the library as compensation. He explained that, as Sir Kachel had pointed out, he still lacked awareness of his standing, and gaining knowledge would help him correct that. Lord George reacted with surprise, wondering how far Yuki had thought things through. Yuki simply maintained a calm expression, though internally, everything was unfolding according to his plan. He had anticipated that Sir Kachel would cause an issue if he approached from the main gate. Over the past 3 years, he had memorized his father's training schedule, ensuring that his return would align with a moment when the situation would be noticed. The plan had been carefully arranged to succeed. Lord George granted him permission to use the library. Turning to Kachel, he pointed out that since Yuki had expressed it in that manner, there should be no objection. Kachel showed clear reluctance and discomfort but ultimately gave his agreement, even if it was done unwillingly. Later, Yuki found himself inside the mansion, quietly satisfied that his plan had worked as intended. As he moved through the halls, he noticed Sir Kachel stepping out of the library. Their eyes met briefly, and Yuki wondered what was troubling him. Butler Neil greeted Yuki, informing him that he had been expecting him, as Lord George had already explained the situation. Neil had served the mansion for many years. It was said that in his youth, he had even accompanied George onto the battlefield. Yuki asked whether Kachel had been there moments ago. Neil answered while remarking that Kachel seemed to lack any real understanding of how to act as a tutor. He then asked Yuki what kind of books he wished to read. There were not many available, as books were considered valuable items. Yuki requested books about the history of the country. Neil showed a hint of curiosity, wondering if Yuki could actually read them. Yuki gave a modest response, suggesting that he could manage. As Yuki tried to open the bookshelf, he found that it would not move. He mentioned this to Neil, who replied that he had already unlocked it. Yuki questioned this as it still refused to open. Looking closer, Yuki noticed the mechanism and realized that the door had been sealed using a magic tool. The realization struck him that Kachel had been inside the library earlier. After Neil took his leave, Yuki understood that raising the issue with him would accomplish nothing. Confronting Sir Kachel directly would only cause trouble for the family's name, especially within aristocratic circles. The situation left Yuki with a quiet sense of frustration, as he still struggled to fully understand human behavior. To think that Kachel had gone so far as to block his access to books using magic tools left him with little choice. It had been some time since he last used this method. He cut his index finger slightly, allowing his blood to flow, and activated Mistal blood hacking. By using his magic-infused blood, he interfered with and disrupted the magic sustaining the lock. It followed the same principle as when he had used his blood to cure Alice from the Shinmonbia disease. He analyzed the internal structure of the spell, confirming that the magical lock was placed on the bookshelf door. By interrupting the flow of magical energy, he successfully broke the lock and opened it. Yuki then noted to himself that he would restore the lock later. Neil returned to the room, bringing tea for Yuki, and his attention briefly fell on the book Yuki was reading. Yuki calmly noted that it was fine, as he did not want the tea to spill over the pages. At the same time, Neil's gaze shifted toward the bookshelf lock. The magic tool had been placed back upside down, a result of Yuki restoring it in haste. Neil remarked that even a tutor could make mistakes. Yuki responded with quiet curiosity, as if considering the remark. Neil then reflected on the seal itself, recalling that he had encountered the same kind of spell long ago on the battlefield. Back then, it had taken 3 magicians working together to break it. Yuki responded by noting that such a spell could not be undone by a single person, subtly questioning whether it had truly been Sir Kachel's doing. Yuki then asked whether Neil held any dislike toward Sir Kachel. Neil brushed it off, saying that his words had slipped unintentionally, and added that someone as capable as the tutor would not normally act in such a way. Yuki chose not to press further and returned his focus to the book. After an hour of reading, he came across information about the Elysium Temple. They had once discovered what they called a holy ground and rose as a powerful magical organization. By using ancient spells and magical artifacts as weapons, they built a strong reputation. Yet, despite all that power, they eventually fell, which left Yuki questioning how such a thing could happen. He considered the strength of the Elysium Temple and compared it to that of ordinary humans, wondering how humans had managed to bring about their downfall. The cause was tied to the temple's interference in the territorial conflicts between smaller kingdoms. During that time, internal struggles for power divided the organization into multiple factions. Each faction aligned itself with different kingdoms, leading to wars across several nations. With their access to ancient magic and powerful artifacts, victory should have been easily within their grasp. However, once the battles began, their magical weapons suddenly ceased to function. No one understood the reason behind this failure. Even so, the nations involved continued their campaigns without withdrawing. By the time the wars ended, resentment toward the Elysium Temple had grown. Having become the target of everyone's anger, the Elysium Temple was ultimately destroyed. Most of the magical artifacts they once possessed disappeared without a trace. Yuki lay in bed, deep in thought. He imagined that the people of this era would have replicated magical items and built a more comfortable way of living. Things like tools that could produce warm water with a simple turn, or blankets that could keep a person warm through the night. To think that such valuable items, like a holy sword, could be destroyed during excavation felt pointless to him. From his perspective, that seemed even more troublesome for humans than the existence of the Lord of Nosferatu. In the end, he found no records about Fira Village. The history book only stated that the Elysium Temple had been destroyed, and that the Lindbell Magic Guild had taken responsibility for managing ancient magic to prevent such incidents from happening again. The image of Alice surfaced in his mind. If he wanted to learn more, he realized that he would have to go to the royal capital. The libraries there would be much larger, and there would likely be historians who could provide answers. Through them, he might uncover the fate of Fira Village and its people. He considered what he should do next, narrowing his choices down to 2 paths. The first was to leave the house and enter a school. Since he would not inherit the Grosseria family, he could go to the royal capital and enroll, using that opportunity to learn the general knowledge of the current world. Afterward, he could become an adventurer, moving from place to place. That way, he could conceal the fact that he did not age, regardless of where he came from. The second option was to leave the house and directly search for the ruins of Fira Village. The war had broken out after his death as Dean Nosferatu, and if he could find any descendants of Alice, he might be able to gather information from them. As he thought it through, he realized that he did not necessarily have to choose only one path. It was possible to pursue both. He decided that it would be best to consult his father about it later. Just then, a loud voice echoed from outside, celebrating Lord Zero's. Curious, Yuki moved to the window and looked out, spotting a red carriage, a post carriage. Lord George noticed him at the window and called for him at the right moment, asking him to come down. There was important news regarding Zero's, and he wanted Yuki to hear it as well. Sir Kachel appeared to be in high spirits, showing a rare sense of satisfaction as he regarded Yuki, making it clear that he should feel proud to have such an accomplished elder brother. Yuki found himself unsettled, unable to recall ever seeing Sir Kachel in such a cheerful state before. Lord George then turned his attention to Yuki, asking if he was familiar with the Lindbell Magic Guild, as they had just sent remarkable news concerning Zero's. Yuki noticed that his father also seemed pleased. He then turned his attention to Zero's, wondering if he had been accepted as an apprentice into the guild. However, that was not the case. Instead, Zero's revealed that a member of the royal family, the 8th princess, Iris Rischa, would be coming to observe him and witness a demonstration of his abilities. This was something Yuki had not expected. It was further explained that the princess herself would be joining as an apprentice. Yuki reflected on this, realizing that even members of the royal family could become part of the magic guild. From that, he understood that her visit was not merely personal, but that she would be acting as a representative of the guild to assess Zero's capabilities. Zeros acknowledged that this interpretation was accurate. In Yuki's mind, he recalled how Sir Kachel had often spoken in a similar tone before. Still, he questioned why someone of royal status would come all the way to a baron's estate. Kachel, filled with pride, attributed this opportunity to his persistent efforts in sending letters of recommendation. He made it clear that such results could not be achieved without the proper level of ability, emphasizing that Zeros possessed the necessary magical aptitude. For anyone seeking to become an apprentice in the Magic Guild, which governed ancient magic, a high level of talent was essential. The princess herself had earned her place due to her exceptional aptitude and was now responsible for conducting the evaluation. Zeros regarded the situation as something uncommon, while Kachel maintained that the purpose of the visit was to fully assess the extent of Zeros' abilities. Kachel paused, casting a glance toward Lord George before shifting his attention to Yuki. He pointed at him and made it clear that he was to remain at home and not go anywhere on the day the Royal Highness would arrive. Yuki showed uncertainty at the instruction. Kachel continued, insisting that someone of Yuki's status should not appear before a member of the royal family. He went further, emphasizing that Yuki should not leave at all, speaking in an extreme and dismissive manner. Both Zeros and Lord George reacted with surprise, questioning whether he was serious. Kachel brushed them aside, telling them to remain quiet. He then turned to Zeros and pressed him to repeat the same message to Yuki. Zeros hesitated, but Kachel pushed further, questioning whether someone who could not even make his own younger brother listen could truly master magic. He even suggested presenting Yuki before the Royal Highness, using the remark to provoke Zeros. Kachel's words were meant to undermine him, placing Yuki and Zeros on the same level while emphasizing Yuki's status. The tension showed clearly on Zeros' face. Zeros bore blonde hair inherited from their father and blue eyes from both their father and his legitimate wife. His appearance closely resembled their father, making it difficult for Yuki to hold any resentment toward him. Even so, Zeros, against his own will, spoke firmly. He explained that the Royal Highness belonged to the royal bloodline of the country, and that it would be unacceptable for someone of lower standing to present themselves before such a figure. Kachel urged him to be more direct, pressing him to make it clearer what Yuki should do. Zeros continued, stating that Yuki, born from a commoner encountered by their father on the battlefield, had no place in the presence of the Royal Highness. He then raised his voice, making it absolute that Yuki must remain in his room on the designated day. Yuki responded with a calm smile, accepting the instruction without resistance. Within his thoughts, however, he had no interest in becoming involved with the royal family or the princess. To him, they were figures who sent adventurers to fight the Demon King while offering little in return. He remembered how individuals claiming to be heroes had once come to his place in the past. Yuki recalled a memory from his past life, where a female adventurer had once come to his place and collapsed from exhaustion. He had given her food and reassured her that he meant no harm. After that encounter, she worked diligently as a guard for Fira village, and she eventually became known as Lyle's grandmother. Back in the present, the memory brought a sense of nostalgia to Yuki, and with that feeling, he made his intentions clear. He reassured Zeros that there was no need to worry. On the designated day, he would keep his curtains closed as requested, ensuring that the Royal Highness would not see him. He further added that if Zeros still felt uneasy, he could simply stay at a town inn for the night or even leave for a short journey with their father's permission. Lord George reacted with a sense of regret, expressing discomfort at the situation. Even if it was for the sake of rising within the aristocratic ranks, hearing his own son speak in such a manner weighed on him. Yuki, however, did not fully understand his father's reaction. Zeros clarified that his instruction had only been for Yuki to stay out of sight on the day of the examination. The mention of staying at an inn or leaving on a journey came across as unnecessary and carried a tone that felt misplaced. Yuki showed confusion, as that had not been his intention. In truth, Yuki had been trying to support his brother. Having lacked a proper family in his previous life, he valued the presence of an older sibling. Wanting to remove any misunderstanding, Yuki decided to make himself clearer. He stated firmly that he had no interest in the Magic Guild or in the Royal Highness, as he was already content living within the barony. He had no desire to place himself in a situation where he might encounter her and only wished to be of use. His words carried a weight that unsettled the atmosphere. He then explained calmly that if he were to meet the Royal Highness, there might be expectations of etiquette that he had yet to learn, which could lead to mistakes. Such an outcome could reflect poorly on them and cause embarrassment among other nobles. Zeros listened, holding back his reaction. Yuki continued, stating that he held no attachment to ancient magic. The fall of the Elysium Temple itself showed that power alone was not the solution to everything. With that in mind, he made it clear that he would not cause any trouble on the designated day and that he would simply hope for Zero's success in joining the guild. At that point, Zero's reacted strongly. He focused on the implications of Yuki's words, questioning the meaning behind them. The remarks about taking chances, being useful, and avoiding becoming a laughingstock led him to feel as though he was being looked down upon. He began to question whether Yuki was implying that he was not worthy of entering the Magic Guild. Yuki was taken aback, unable to understand how the situation had escalated in that direction. Zero's continued, asserting that as an illegitimate child, Yuki should already be grateful for being allowed to stay within the mansion, yet still seemed to look down on him. Lord George stepped in, telling Zero's to stop and making it clear that there was no way Yuki had intended his words in that manner. Zero's reacted, his composure shaken. Zero's then expressed his desire to demonstrate his strength to Yuki. Lord George questioned this intention, but Zero's insisted that he wanted to prove the power of ancient magic and show just how strong he had become. At that point, Sir Kachel spoke up, addressing Lord George with a request. He reasoned that since Yuki likely did not understand the true value of ancient magic, it would be necessary to properly instill that understanding in him through demonstration, especially to ensure that he would not act improperly within aristocratic society. Zero's continued to press the matter, appealing to his father. Lord George accepted, stating that he would personally assess Zero's strength. He then ordered for his practice sword to be brought, deciding that Zero's would face him in a mock battle. Yuki attempted to step forward, but Lord George instructed him to remain where he was and observe the match between them. Before the fight began, Lord George informed Sir Kachel that the servants were not allowed to witness the use of ancient magic and asked if that arrangement was acceptable. Kachel agreed with satisfaction. Kachel then took on the role of judge, establishing that the first one to drop their sword would be declared the loser. Both sides accepted the condition. The match began. Zero's moved first, drawing a rune in the air as he activated his magic. As Yuki observed, he noticed that the casting felt different from the magic he had known before, as if something about it could not be perceived in the usual way. Nearby, Kachel watched with approval as Zero's completed his casting. With enhanced speed, Zero's surged forward toward Lord George. Both Yuki and Lord George were caught off guard by the sudden burst of speed. Zero's sword strike forced his father to step back. With ordinary magic, the most it could do was slightly enhance strength, only by a small margin. Considering the difference in their physiques, the force behind Zero's attack was clearly far beyond that, showing a level of power that surpassed normal expectations. As the exchange continued, Lord George acknowledged the quality of Zero's movements, recognizing the results of his training. Zero's affirmed that through ancient magic, he could now stand on equal footing with him. He then turned his attention toward Yuki, making it clear that this was the power he had gained. While observing, Yuki reflected that such power was not something easily understood. With abilities like that, Zero's would undoubtedly rise to a higher position within the Grosseria family. From Yuki's perspective, his brother clearly held the advantage in both strength and speed. The only reason their father could keep up was due to his extensive combat experience. At that moment, Yuki understood why the Linbell Magic Guild had taken control over ancient magic. It was simply too powerful and too dangerous for the general public to handle. This, then, was ancient magic. Even so, Yuki could not grasp its underlying theory or the method of its casting. There was a strong possibility that ancient magic functioned through an entirely different language. As he continued watching, Yuki carefully observed his brother's finger movements, committing them to memory. He resolved to study them further and attempt to understand them on his own. Yuki traced a rune across his palm, and in that instant he felt something unfamiliar surge through him. The sensation startled him as heat spread across his limbs, and a powerful force rose from deep within his body. It felt as if he was returning to his former self, the Lord of Nosferatu, Dean Nosferatu. Realizing the danger of what was happening, he understood that remaining there would be a mistake. He quickly apologized to both his brother and father, claiming that he felt unwell, and immediately left the scene. Lord George showed concern for his condition, while Zero's called out after him. Zero's pursued him, intent on making him stay and witness his strength. Yuki questioned why he was being chased, especially with Zero's using enhanced speed. Yuki knew he could not afford to be caught. In response, his own speed increased. Zero's was caught off guard by the sudden burst of speed, unable to keep up despite his enhancement. Confusion set in as the distance between them widened. Yuki moved ahead and leaped upward toward a nearby window. By the time Zero's reached the spot, he could no longer find him. Yuki had already disappeared from sight. Now alone, Yuki looked down at the rune on his palm, still unable to believe what had just happened. He had managed to activate ancient magic, even though all he had done was draw the crest using his own blood. Later on, Sir Kachel noticed that Zero's seemed unsettled and questioned the reason behind it. Zero's admitted that he had been unable to catch up to Yuki and began to wonder if Yuki had also used magic. Kachel dismissed the idea, stating that it was impossible. Ancient magic relied on predetermined spells and chants, and its use required a continuous flow of internal magic power. Without proper instruction, it could not be used. Even so, Zeros remained unconvinced. Kachel leaned closer and reminded him that he himself had only recently learned to use enhancement and likely had not mastered it yet. He assured him that once fully controlled, he should be able to dominate a mock battle without issue. Zeros clenched his fist, still uneasy, admitting that there were times when he felt he might not be able to surpass Yuki. Kachel chose to set the matter aside for the moment, stating that they would discuss it later. He made it clear that he would ensure that Yuki would not become an obstacle once Zeros demonstrated his true ability as expected. Zeros accepted those words, though the feeling lingered. Meanwhile, from a nearby window, Yuki quietly observed the situation and reflected on how close things had been. He remained inside his room, watching as the rune on his palm gradually faded. The realization lingered that simply drawing it had been enough to activate the spell. He recalled how, in his previous life, he would often cut his index finger to write notes on his hand or on parchment. Back then, Lal had found the habit amusing, associating it with the traits of a vampire. Now, Yuki understood that this connection might hold more meaning than he had thought. He resolved to investigate ancient magic further. Afterward, he quietly apologized to Martha for catching her off guard earlier, having entered while she was not properly dressed. Martha responded, pointing out that such an apology felt lacking considering he had entered while she was changing. She expressed how startled she had been, while Yuki sincerely acknowledged his mistake and apologized again. Martha admitted that she had felt relieved the moment she realized it was him. Yuki found that reaction somewhat unexpected, but before he could continue, Martha brushed it aside, explaining that it was fine because she had already pledged her loyalty to him. She then recalled how, when her mother fell ill and had to leave her position at the barony, Yuki had spoken to his father to have her employed in her place. Without that help, both she and her mother might have ended up with nowhere to live. In the past, Martha's mother had been the only one willing to care for Yuki. Because of that, he could not bring himself to abandon someone who had been close to him since childhood. It was also a time when the barony had been more lenient, before Sir Kachel's arrival. Yuki then reflected on whether it might have been too much for Martha to take care of him while living so far from the main mansion. Martha responded by mentioning that he regularly visited her mother. Yuki admitted that he had grown tired of staying in the mansion all the time, especially since there was no one there he could truly talk to. Martha shared that her mother's condition had noticeably improved whenever Yuki came to visit, though Yuki considered it nothing more than coincidence. Martha seemed to question that idea. Even so, she reaffirmed that her loyalty remained with him. Yuki found her persistence notable and remarked that he had never seen her as merely a servant. Martha responded that this was something he had always told both her and her mother. Yuki then clarified that, despite being watched closely by his older brother and Sir Kachel, he saw Martha not as a servant but as a companion who lived alongside him in the mansion. Martha smiled at that, and the two shared a simple gesture of understanding. She accepted his words, acknowledging them fully. After a moment, Yuki pointed out that she had yet to react to the fact that he had entered through a second-floor window. Martha expressed that she already knew how remarkable Lord Yuki was, and Yuki responded with quiet curiosity. Martha recalled moments from the past, remembering how Yuki had protected her when she was still easily frightened, driving away bugs with magic or healing her burned hand. After those moments, he would always insist that it remain a secret. She reflected on how many secrets she now carried because of him. Yuki apologized for that, but Martha lightly pointed out that this situation was no different, as it would also be another secret to keep. Yuki accepted that and entrusted her with it. Martha then brought up another matter, pointing out that he had entered while she was changing and asked what he had to say about it. Yuki acknowledged her beauty without hesitation. In response, Martha offered, as a gesture of appreciation, to wash his hair. Yuki declined, mentioning that he had already taken care of it earlier. In the middle of their conversation, Lord George arrived. He informed Yuki that when the Royal Highness came, he would allow him to stay at a town inn if needed. In truth, there was no need for him to go that far. Lord George explained that Yuki could simply remain in his room and keep the window closed, as that was what the tutor from the Magic Guild had advised. As he spoke, there was a trace of unease in him. Yuki reassured his father that he had no objections to the arrangement. He then stood up and added that Martha would accompany him as well, assuring Lord George that there was nothing to worry about. Suddenly, Lord George stepped forward and embraced Yuki, offering an apology. He admitted his own shortcomings, believing himself unfit to act as an aristocrat, and regretted putting his own son in such a situation. Yuki felt a bit uneasy and pointed out that Martha was watching. Martha quickly turned away, insisting that she was not, and encouraged him to continue. Yuki accepted the moment as it was. He had always believed that it was his role to comfort others, especially children. Yet in that instant he realized that being the one receiving comfort was not a bad feeling. In his previous life, he had never known what it was like to have parents. Now, he had a father, a younger sister like Rumia, an older brother like Zeros, and Martha by his side. Those alone were enough to make him feel grateful for being reborn as a human. After things settled, Yuki expressed his gratitude to his father, assuring him that he would be fine. Lord George responded by saying that arrangements would be made to avoid any inconvenience, and he entrusted Martha with looking after Yuki. Yuki felt moved, finding that his father's words were already more than enough. Martha accepted the responsibility, assuring that she would take care of Yuki. They both showed respect as Lord George took his leave. Meanwhile, in Zeros' room, Kachel questioned whether he was still thinking about what had happened with Yuki. Zeros admitted that he was. Kachel reaffirmed his stance, insisting once again that Yuki could not possibly use ancient magic, as such power could only be wielded by those specifically chosen for it. Zeros acknowledged the words, yet the unease within him did not fade. Sir Kachel let out a quiet sigh, noting that it was natural for Zeros to feel cautious toward Yuki. He then directed Zeros' attention to their father's reaction, pointing out that Lord George seemed more concerned about Yuki. To him, it appeared as though the Baron had already been influenced by Yuki, which he interpreted as a sign that Yuki was aiming to surpass Zeros as the heir. Those words weighed on Zeros, making him feel diminished. Kachel urged him not to overlook the matter. He continued by explaining that Yuki had been gradually turning servants into his allies. He brought up the recent incident where Yuki had attempted to share the prey he hunted with a servant, presenting it as clear evidence of his intentions. To Kachel, the situation was obvious. If left unchecked, the outcome could become unpredictable. Zeros grew concerned, beginning to question whether Yuki truly intended to overtake him. Kachel reassured him that such struggles were common within aristocratic families. With a sharper tone, Kachel emphasized that it was unacceptable for someone of Yuki's position to aim for control over the very family that had taken him in, especially if it stemmed from a belief that he was superior to the rightful heir. He insisted that Yuki needed to be shown the true extent of Zeros' strength. Shifting his tone, Kachel then presented himself as Zeros' ally, claiming to be the only one standing on his side. He portrayed Yuki as a threat to the barony, suggesting that he was attempting to take everything for himself. Kachel then lowered himself, acting as though he was unworthy due to his limited magical ability, while still expressing trust in Zeros. This approach prompted Zeros to respond, affirming his trust in Kachel without hesitation. A faint smile appeared on Kachel's face. Kachel then instructed Zeros to repeat a set of words while holding the amulet he had given him. Under that influence, Zeros complied, repeating the statement that framed Yuki as his enemy, someone he would have to confront no matter the cost. As he spoke, it became clear that Zeros was being completely guided by Kachel's influence. Confident in his manipulation, Kachel believed that regardless of Yuki's actions, he would not be able to surpass Zeros. With that assurance, he felt certain that the upcoming test on the designated day would proceed in Zeros' favor. After some time, Yuki and Neil arrived near the staircase. Neil noted that the timing was appropriate, as he had a message to deliver from Lord George. The message was that Her Royal Highness would arrive in 5 days. Yuki was permitted to stay at the Town's Inn starting the day before her arrival. In addition, beginning the following evening, Yuki was prohibited from going to the mountain, as it had been designated as one of the candidate locations for the upcoming test. Yuki responded with a calm smile, acknowledging the instructions. In his mind, he noted that the mountain had now become a restricted area. Although he had intended to continue experimenting with ancient magic there, he accepted that it could not be helped. He quietly resolved that he would slip out of the mansion again that night. Until then, he decided to verify what he could within his room. He recalled that his brother Zeros cast ancient magic by drawing a crest in the air and following it with a chant. Yuki carefully reviewed the movement of Zeros' fingers when drawing the crest. However, the chant itself remained unknown to him. He reasoned that it was likely a different language used exclusively for ancient magic. Despite that, when Yuki had drawn the crest himself, he had not spoken any chant, yet the magic still activated, enhancing his body. The reason behind that remained unclear to him. He chose to start from the beginning. In this world, there existed general magic and ancient magic, the latter discovered by the Elysium Temple. The differences between them lay in power and the consumption of magical energy, with ancient magic being roughly 3 times superior in both aspects. His brother Zeros, after using a boosting spell, had been able to fight evenly against their father, a seasoned warrior. When Yuki reproduced the same crest, his own body had felt lighter. The question that remained was why his magic had activated in such a way. To test this, he decided to try using parchment. He first drew the rune with ink, but nothing happened. There was only silence. Next, he prepared to use mistal blood, the same method he had used before. This time, he planned to draw the rune using his own blood through the pen. After a few seconds, the magic activated. Yuki felt his body grow lighter, and his movements became faster. He considered jumping, but before he could act, the effect faded. The duration had been around 10 minutes. Once the magic within the blood was used up, the crest also disappeared. By observing the crest, he could tell how much time remained. Meanwhile, the blood he had drawn on the parchment showed no reaction at all. From that, he concluded that parchment could not be used to produce the boosting effect. He reasoned that the cause must be his mistal blood. To confirm, he checked his status screen. The moment he saw it, he was surprised to find that he had gained an additional skill. He tried to understand what it meant, as he had never possessed a skill related to ancient magic before. In his previous life, he had never used ancient magic. At the time of his death, he had been pierced by an ancient item, the Holy Sword. He began to consider whether that event was the reason. His blood was part of his body. When he died in his previous life, the Holy Sword had been covered in his blood. That meant he had been connected to an ancient item at the moment of death. Because he was reincarnated while still linked to that item, it suggested that he had gained an aptitude for ancient magic. Yuki found the idea intriguing. Right after his reincarnation, he had assumed that humans of this era would have studied ancient items and built their society around them. However, that had not happened. Ancient items had disappeared due to wars, and now ancient magic was controlled by the Magician Guild. Even so, he considered that if he mastered ancient magic, he might be able to create a culture that would make the world more comfortable. Yuki pulled himself back from those thoughts, deciding it was enough. He dismissed the idea, seeing it as delusional. In his previous life, he had been known as the Frontier Demon King, but now he was only an illegitimate child of a baron. He kept his expectations low. His true intention was simply to understand humans and learn to live as one of them. He left the affairs of the human world to humans. As he lay on his bed, loud voices reached him from outside. Rumia sounded excited, speaking about how Yuki had caught rabbits and how the evening's meal would be his cash. Martha's voice followed with clear admiration, expressing that Yuki was impressive and that the food would surely taste good. Yuki thought to himself that if Rumia and Martha did not lower their voices, Sir Kachel would become irritated. Yuki felt content with that. He had been reincarnated into a family. Being treated as the illegitimate child of a baron was enough for him. He was no longer feared as a demon lord. He was simply an ordinary master magician. All he wanted was to enjoy a quiet life and have meat to eat every week. In his mind, he wished for his previous life to remain in the past. Later that night, Yuki had planned to head out at midnight, but he overslept. He had eaten too much of Martha's pancakes before going to bed and ended up in a deep food coma. It became clear that his 13-year-old body required proper nutrition and plenty of rest. He noted to himself that the mountain was restricted during the afternoons, so he decided to conduct his research in the morning instead. When night came at the mountain, Dick greeted his master. Yuki expressed his appreciation for Dick coming. Above them, a swarm of bats screeched together, gathering to greet him. Yuki acknowledged the gesture and had Dick send them back, not wanting to draw attention with something unusual. Dick immediately complied. Yuki then instructed Dick to have the others guard the area while he conducted his experiment. With that arranged, he was free to test his abilities without concern. The experiment he had attempted earlier at the mansion involved boosting his power twice. Now, he intended to see the results more clearly. He took a step forward and then dashed. The speed surprised him. Everything around him blurred, and his senses struggled to keep up. The sensation was overwhelming, yet he continued. He pushed further and leapt high into the air. At that moment, he felt a familiar sensation, similar to when he had flown using magic in his previous life. After about 10 minutes, the effect faded. He found the result impressive. Yuki reflected on how his brother Zero's cast ancient magic by drawing crests in the air while chanting. Since chanting required the use of one's voice, it limited the user to casting only one spell at a time. However, Yuki did not have that limitation. By using mistal blood, he could draw multiple crests and activate several spells at once. He found the process surprisingly enjoyable. Curious about the limits, he wondered what would happen if he used 3 boosts at the same time. He decided to try it. Moments later, he collapsed. Pain spread through his body, leaving him unable to feel or move his legs. It became clear that the strain was too much for a 13-year-old body to handle. About 10 minutes later, Yuki's entire body trembled as he struggled to catch his breath. He recognized that the effect had finally worn off. At that moment, Dick appeared and checked on him. Seeing Dick, Yuki reflected that using 3 spells at once was beyond his current limits. At the same time, a new thought crossed his mind, wondering what would happen if he drew a crest on Dick's body instead. Dick showed interest in the idea and encouraged Yuki to try it on him. Yuki hesitated briefly, confirming if he was truly willing. Driven by curiosity, Yuki proceeded and carefully drew a crest on Dick's body. He instructed Dick to remain still as he completed the marking. Once finished, the crest was visible on Dick's wings. Yuki observed closely and checked for any unusual sensations. Dick confirmed that something felt different. Yuki decided that it would be safer to remove it immediately. However, Dick reacted quickly and refused. In the next moment he suddenly took off at incredible speed, flying upward with ease. The sensation overwhelmed him as he experienced the effect firsthand. Yuki realized that caution was necessary, as such speed would be difficult to control. He warned Dick to be careful of obstacles like trees. Dick, however, felt confident, noting that even his sound-based abilities had grown stronger. He was amazed by the level of power Yuki possessed. Watching this, Yuki reflected that even the other bats could make use of ancient magic in this way. That meant the Magician Guild was handling this kind of power freely. To Yuki, ancient magic was something truly dangerous. In the end, he believed that regardless of the Magician Guild, commoners were better off focusing on general education. Magic should remain a hobby, as going beyond that carried too much risk. After some time, Yuki decided to return home, realizing he was already late for breakfast and that Martha would likely be upset. He thought about the meal waiting for him, expecting it to include syrup from the previous day, which would pair well with bread. As he prepared to head back, looking forward to breakfast, Dick suddenly informed him that there were people nearby. That immediately caught Yuki's attention. Dick detected the presence of people fighting against a wild beast. Yuki found the situation troublesome and asked what kind of creature it was. Dick identified them as dark bears. Yuki considered it the natural result of entering the mountain unprepared and accepted that nothing could be done about it. To him, they were simply reckless travelers, and their situation did not matter to him at all. However, Dick questioned that view, noticing that Yuki was already moving quickly, even increasing his speed further. Yuki reasoned that it could not be ignored, as the mountain might serve as the site for his brother's upcoming test. He considered the possibility that the presence of casualties could lead to the test being postponed. That thought unsettled him. If such a thing happened, Sir Kachel would likely become even more displeased. The idea alone was enough to make Yuki uneasy. He then asked Dick to point out where the group had entered the mountain without preparation. Meanwhile, at the scene, a knight was severely injured as he faced a dark bear. Despite his condition, he urged the princess to retreat, recognizing that confronting such a beast was beyond their capability. The dark bear let out a powerful roar. The princess hesitated, clearly troubled by the idea of leaving the knight behind. The knight grew frustrated, recalling how others had assured him that the mountain was safe and free of dangerous beasts. He also realized that the map they had relied on was completely useless. Even so, the princess stepped forward, focusing on finding a way to break through the situation. The knight accepted this and resolved to act as a distraction, allowing her to use her magic. With that decision made, the knight forced himself to stand and charge toward the bear, positioning himself as its opponent. Behind the knight, the princess focused as she continued her incantation. Despite his injuries, the knight managed to land a solid axe strike against the bear, causing it to roar in pain. Sensing the timing, the princess signaled for him to retreat, and the knight stepped back without hesitation. With that opening, the princess released her spell. The ancient magic, an Ifrit flame blast, struck the bear directly. Flames engulfed the creature as it roared under the impact. The knight observed that the attack was effective and endured, trusting the princess to continue. She remained focused, maintaining her effort. Moments later, the dark bear weakened, collapsed, and finally fell. The knight stayed alert, aware that the situation could still be dangerous. As he spoke, the princess interrupted him, having detected the presence of more beasts nearby. She then took out a letter that had described the test site as S-ranked in safety. The presence of a level C dark bear did not match that description, leaving her uncertain about the situation. Without delay, she decided that they needed to leave, planning to treat the knight's injuries along the way. Suddenly, the knight cried out, drawing her attention. The princess turned and was met with the sight of two dark bears appearing without warning. One of them immediately attacked, its claws striking her and sending her crashing into a nearby tree. The impact left her in pain. As she struggled, she saw one bear approaching her while the other shifted its focus toward the knight. At that moment, her voice failed her, preventing her from casting magic. The knight, unable to intervene, could only watch as the bear prepared to strike. Fear spread through her body as she realized she still had something left unfinished. Then, in an instant, her body vanished from where she lay. She heard a voice, calm and steady, noting that the mountain was filled with beasts and that it was dangerous to come unprepared. When she opened her eyes, she found herself held in midair, facing Yuki. The princess found herself wondering about the young man who had just rescued them, questioning who he was and whether he had been using a boosting effect. Yuki explained that the dark bears were currently in their breeding season and advised that getting close to their territory was dangerous. If encountered, the only option was to retreat immediately. As she listened, the princess realized that Yuki was able to carry her at high speed while still maintaining his boost. Soon after, he landed and carefully set her down. Yuki then noted that it might already be too late, as the dark bears had been provoked. He turned his attention to the bats and confirmed that he was fine before directing them to assist the knight. Without hesitation, the bats swarmed toward the other bear. The creature roared as it was struck repeatedly by the bats. The princess was surprised to see ordinary bats capable of overwhelming a dark bear in such a way. Meanwhile, the knight regained momentum, coordinating his attacks with the bats, and the combined effort began to take effect. Yuki then focused on the remaining dark bear and indicated that he would handle it. He checked whether the princess could still use her magic. She confirmed that she still had some strength left. Yuki instructed her to prepare her flame magic once more, as he intended to observe it closely. He would signal when the timing was right. With that, he vanished from sight. The princess observed his speed, realizing that even with boosting, such movement should only reach a certain level. However, she pushed that thought aside and concentrated on her task. As she began her incantation, Yuki was already engaging the dark bear. The beast struggled to react, unable to match his speed. Yuki moved behind it and drove his blade into its shoulder. Immediately after, he followed through by striking the bear's chest with a freezing attack, piercing it with a sudden burst of ice. The princess was surprised when she recognized the use of ice magic. The dark bear's thick fur reduced the effects of both fire and ice, but Yuki directed his ice magic precisely through the wound he had already created. The princess felt that her magic might no longer be necessary. However, Yuki dismissed that thought, acknowledging the strength of the dark bear. As a precaution, he had her prepare the finishing blow, as he wanted to observe how her ancient magic would bring down the beast. The princess accepted this. She then cast the Ifrit flame blast once more toward the dark bear. Yuki signaled for the knight and Dick to move away as the flames approached, and the knight quickly complied. Soon after, both dark bears were burned and defeated. The princess let out a quiet breath, reflecting that they had managed to survive. She expressed her gratitude toward Yuki for saving them. Yuki accepted it calmly, noting that he had also gained something valuable from the encounter. The princess reflected on the situation, realizing that someone with such ability existed in this region. Despite being around her age, Yuki displayed remarkable skill. The knight also showed his appreciation and wondered if the bats assisting them were Yuki's familiars. Yuki clarified that he had only befriended them not long ago. The princess began to question whether this encounter itself might have been part of another test. Meanwhile, Yuki wondered if he was simply imagining things. Even so, he could not ignore the resemblance, as the princess looked strikingly similar to Alice. Yuki explained that he had assumed they were outsiders, since the locals in the area already knew how to avoid the dark bear's nest. He questioned their reason for coming there. The knight urged Yuki not to place blame on the princess, explaining that they had come because they were told the place was safe. Yuki asked who had given them that information. The knight revealed that it came from a tutor working at the House of Grossaria, named Kachel. Yuki was visibly surprised upon hearing the name Kachel. He acknowledged it, thinking that the man should consider his actions more carefully, as just a little more and the test could have been ruined. The princess began to realize that Yuki might be the son of Baron Grossaria. Yuki immediately dismissed that assumption, stating that he was only an ordinary huntsman. The princess questioned how an ordinary man could possess knowledge of magic. Yuki clarified that he was simply an ordinary man who was familiar with magic. The princess accepted his explanation and acknowledged that he possessed impressive skill. She noted that with such ability he could easily enter the Magician Guild, and then questioned whether he was already part of it. Yuki affirmed this based on her earlier statement. The princess then apologized for the delayed introduction. She explained that she had been appointed to assist in planning the test course this time and introduced herself as Clara. The old man followed, identifying himself as Burns, the princess's escort. Clara explained that the test to join the Magician Guild would be held there in a few days, and that they had come to survey the site to ensure it was safe. Burns added that the matter was being kept secret from the locals and requested that Yuki not disclose it, as it could cause trouble. Yuki acknowledged the situation. Clara then lowered her head and expressed her gratitude once more for being saved. Clara asked if it would be all right to know Yuki's name. Yuki questioned whether it was truly necessary. Clara explained that it was not required, but they simply wanted to know the name of the one who had saved them. Clara then offered Yuki something as a token of gratitude. Yuki responded that it was not needed. Clara let out a small chuckle and brought up how a hunter would normally trade their spoils for money. Yuki paused at that thought, finding the situation somewhat troublesome. Clara continued by pointing out that the dark bear's corpses had already been burned, and urged Yuki to accept the gift in exchange as she handed it to him. Yuki accepted it and expressed his thanks. Clara once again showed her gratitude, acknowledging that without his help, their lives would have been lost. Yuki responded by discouraging such grim remarks. At that moment, Lyle and his daughter Alice came to Yuki's mind. He then remarked that Clara resembled the daughter of a foolish man he knew. Clara wondered if he meant a descendant of someone. Yuki denied it and brushed the matter aside, stating that he would escort the two of them down to the foot of the mountain. Later, Clara and Burns were already seated inside their carriage. Burns noted that in the end, Yuki had only accepted Clara's hair clip. Clara reflected that Yuki was a remarkable person, possessing impressive combat ability at such a young age. His courage in striking directly at the monster's vital point with a single blow stood out to her. She found herself wishing to have someone like him by her side. Burns responded by pointing out that becoming the princess's most trusted knight was a position that many could only dream of. Clara expressed a quiet regret that Yuki had not shared his name with her. Burns reasoned that it was because Yuki had saved her life, and held on to the hope that another opportunity to meet him would come soon. Burns began to wonder if Yuki might actually be the young man named Zeros Grossaria, the one who intended to join the Magician Guild. Clara shared that she had been thinking the same. Burns then reflected on how uncertain that assumption was, considering the description given in Sir Kachel's letter of recommendation, which described a well-mannered young nobleman with blue eyes and blonde hair. He questioned whether the princess had ever considered that Sir Kachel's words might not be entirely reliable. Clara pointed out that Sir Kachel's father held a high position as His Excellency. Even so, Burns maintained his doubts about Sir Kachel's judgment. He reasoned that even if the boy was not Zero's, Sir Kachel would still be at fault for overlooking other talents in the area. Burns further concluded that Sir Kachel would be removed from the guild, especially after causing the princess to go through such a dangerous situation. Clara continued thinking about Yuki, wondering who he truly was if he was not Zero's. To her, Yuki appeared as a mysterious hunter with strong combat ability and powerful beasts following him. He also seemed to know someone who resembled her. Clara felt the need to look deeper into information about that barony. Meanwhile, at the inn, Yuki sat in boredom, finding the festival outside very tempting. Martha then entered the room and informed him that the tea was ready. Yuki expressed his thanks and invited her to have tea together, noting that it was acceptable since they were not in the mansion. Yuki then asked if the curtain could be opened. Martha responded that if he truly wished for it, she would take full responsibility for anything that might happen. Yuki apologized and decided not to insist further. It was the day before Zero's, Yuki's brother, would take the test. The town had become very crowded, as the visit of Her Royal Highness was considered a once-in-a-lifetime event. Yuki had been instructed to remain at the inn until the princess's visit to the barony was over. Yuki reflected that, in the end, no one could know that he had encountered Clara while she was surveying the area. He wondered whether the guild had already received any reports regarding Kachel. He recalled that Clara had used fire-type ancient magic, and he remembered the movement of her fingers, believing that he should be able to replicate the same technique. He then considered what might happen if he were to apply that magic onto Dick's body. For Yuki, being confined inside the inn was not entirely a bad thing. He realized that if he went outside, he would likely spend his time experimenting with magic. That thought made him understand why magicians often became deeply absorbed in magical research. He recognized that researching magic naturally increases one's capabilities. However, if the sole purpose becomes nothing more than increasing those capabilities, then it would lead to a lifetime spent only on research. Yuki had encountered such individuals in his previous life, and he knew it was not a pleasant path. Martha then informed him that the test site would be set in Kachel Forest. The mountain was completely ruled out, and the swamp was also unsuitable due to something present there. Yuki agreed with that decision. He thought that Clara and Burns must have reached that conclusion after being attacked by dark bears in a place that was supposed to be safe. In his mind, Sir Kachel's credibility had dropped to nothing. Yuki then asked Martha whether she was an only child, and she confirmed that she was. He explained that what he was about to say was only a hypothetical situation, asking her to imagine a girl slightly older than her who looked exactly like Melissa. He wondered whether she would question their relationship. Martha considered the possibility and questioned whether it implied an affair within her household. Yuki clarified that he was asking on behalf of a friend. Martha then shared that she had heard that in this world, there could be 3 people who look alike. Because of that, she would not judge based on appearance alone, but instead rely on other factors. She mentioned that her mother was very skilled at making apple pie. Yuki responded that he was also fond of Melissa's apple pie. Martha explained that her mother had inherited the apple pie recipe from her grandmother, who had learned it from her own grandmother. Because of that, it made sense that their entire family had a strong liking for apple pie. Yuki reflected on that and understood it as Martha making her judgment based on favorite food. Martha confirmed that idea, though she added that if the person did not live in the same household, then that conclusion might not always hold true. Yuki acknowledged that her answer was sufficient and expressed his gratitude. Yuki then wondered if he would ever have the chance to ask Clara about her favorite food if they were to meet again. He also questioned whether Alice's favorite dish still existed in this era, recalling it as a thin-skinned venison pie with a spicy sauce. Martha expressed that she was glad her answer had been helpful. Yuki responded with appreciation, and because of that, he wanted Martha to accompany him whenever he left the mansion. Martha noted that such a request could easily be taken as an invitation to a date. Yuki considered that idea only applicable if he were an adult. Martha then informed Yuki that while she had been away, a package had arrived at her home addressed to her mother. Inside was a dark bear's claw. Though it had been burned, it still held value. Melissa had described the sender as a kind person, wondering who could have sent it, while she held a handkerchief embroidered with Yuki's name. To Yuki, being confined inside the inn remained dull, but spending time like this with Martha did not feel so bad. At that moment, another maid entered the room and asked for Lord Yuki, identifying herself as a maid from the main mansion. Yuki acknowledged his presence, aware that disappearing would only upset Martha. Martha quietly regarded this as a successful attempt to keep him from slipping away. Yuki reacted to that with mild amusement, but the other maid quickly shifted the tone, stating that it was not the time for jokes. She delivered an order from the princess, stating that the entire family was to come and introduce themselves to her, and instructed Yuki to return home immediately. Yuki was left standing there, clearly confused. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Sir Kachel struck his table in frustration, unable to accept the situation. He questioned why he had been summoned back to the guild. The letter he had received contained details about the site he had submitted as the candidate location for the examination, along with the report that the individual sent to survey the area had been attacked. It stated that he was originally meant to return immediately to give an explanation, but due to the presence of future examinees, the decision had been made to proceed with the examination as scheduled. After the examination, he was to return to the guild without delay. From Kachel's perspective, he had carefully selected that location to allow Zero's gross area to stand out as much as possible. He could not understand how things had turned out this way. His thoughts shifted toward Yuki, who had hunted in that same place with ease. Kachel had intended to demonstrate Zero's abilities by having him take an active role in that very location. However, the situation had changed when the surveyor was attacked by the beast there. If Zero's gross area were to pass the test, those who entered the Magician Guild's educational institution would be allowed to choose their own teacher. If Zero's selected Kachel, then Kachel's position would be secured. But if Zero's were to fail the test, then Kachel himself would likely be finished as well. At that moment, a knock came from the door, followed by a request to enter. Zero's wished to speak with Kachel about something. Kachel allowed him to come in. After they sat down, Zero's expressed his concern about whether he would truly be able to pass the test. Kachel rose to his feet in reaction, questioning that doubt. He insisted that such negative thinking should be avoided, especially with Her Royal Highness already on her way to the test site. Kachel then reminded Zero's that he was the heir of the Grossaria family, and that expressing such uncertainty would only allow his illegitimate brother to push him further behind. Zero's questioned whether that was what Yuki intended to do. Kachel affirmed it without hesitation, reminding him that this had already been explained many times. In Kachel's view, Yuki was nothing more than a disruptive presence within the aristocracy, someone who needed to be put in his place and prevented from acting freely. His agitation became more apparent as his thoughts grew more intense. Kachel went on to reflect on his own household, explaining that the house of Megan had fallen into disorder because of an illegitimate child who excelled in magic. He made it clear that he did not want Zero's to suffer the same outcome. Zero's, however, acknowledged that Yuki was still his brother. Kachel dismissed that point, insisting that Yuki was attempting to remove Zero's, even as the servants were already aware of the circulating rumors. There were even whispers that the young lady Rumia had grown attached to Yuki. Zero's began to accept what he was hearing, feeling that things were becoming clearer. As Kachel had guided him, Zero's came to believe that Kachel was the only person he could rely on. Kachel then pressed the point further, making sure Zero's understood that his brothers stood as his enemy. He also brought up that Her Royal Highness had just ordered all members of the barony to gather, even though she should not have been aware of Yuki. He led Zero's to consider the meaning behind that situation. Zero's came to the conclusion that Yuki was attempting to slander him in order to drive him away. Kachel followed by making him realize the level of danger he was currently facing. Kachel reminded Zero's of the talent he possessed and urged him to place faith in himself, encouraging him to use the greatest magic he could, at a level that would even impress Her Highness. Zero's accepted that resolve. Kachel then emphasized that he must win, no matter the cost, for the sake of his house. In the end, Kachel expressed his anticipation for what was to come, focusing on the heir of the Grossaria house, Zero's Grossaria. The day finally arrived, and they all stood outside, waiting for Her Royal Highness. Rumia felt relieved that her brother Yuki had returned, quietly thinking that this might allow Her Royal Highness to officially recognize him as a member of their house. Yuki chose to stand at the back together with Martha and the other servants. Their father instructed everyone to remain quiet as the arrival of Her Royal Highness approached. Burns then noticed a familiar figure already kneeling among them. George pointed out that it was still too early to kneel. Yuki felt a sense of embarrassment and wished to hide his face, realizing that Burns and Clara were present. The thought of them being connected to Her Royal Highness made him reluctant to be there. Soon after, George led the household in expressing gratitude for Her Royal Highness's visit to their mansion. Everyone then knelt down in respect. The entire Grossaria household showed their appreciation for granting Zero's Grossaria the opportunity to take the examination. Her Royal Highness acknowledged their warm welcome as she stepped out of the carriage. She made it clear that she had not come in her role as royalty, but rather as an examiner from the Lindbell Magician Guild. With that stated, she expressed that there might not even be a need to conduct the test, directing this toward Lord Zero's Grossaria. When Yuki raised his head, he was surprised to see that it was Clara. She introduced herself under the name Iris Risja. Iris then shifted her attention toward Yuki, mistakenly identifying him as Lord Zero's. She had heard that Lord Zero's Grossaria possessed outstanding magical skill and had been looking forward to meeting him. George stepped in and corrected the misunderstanding, clarifying that she had been speaking to Yuki, the younger brother. He then stated that the one who would be taking the test was his heir, the person standing beside him, Zero's Grossaria. Iris and Burns were left momentarily speechless by the realization. Iris composed herself and acknowledged her mistake. She then turned her attention to Zero's and greeted him. Zero's responded with proper courtesy, though tension showed through his clenched teeth. For Yuki, the entire situation felt awkward. The princess and her escort had naturally used aliases to avoid drawing attention, and Yuki had done the same. However, this led to him being mistaken for his brother. Yuki came to realize that pretending to be a commoner had come back to trouble him, and the situation made him want to slip away. Iris then moved to begin the test, explaining that from that point onward, since their destination was a magic-influenced D area, only a selected group would be allowed to accompany them. Kachel stepped forward and offered himself as Iris's guide to the test site in Kachel Forest. Iris accepted his offer. Yuki reflected that if his brother were accepted into the guild, it would allow him to build connections with higher-ranking nobles within it. Their household would remain secure, and with that, Yuki himself would be free to go wherever he wished. In his thoughts, Nosferatu would remain at a distance, quietly wishing for the happiness of his family. Iris then informed George that she required assistance for Lord Zero's examination. George responded that there was no one in the main house with sufficient magical knowledge. The role required someone who understood magic well, could use it effectively, and was capable of handling unexpected situations. With that in mind, he put forward Yuki as the most suitable choice. He acknowledged Yuki's skill in magic and recalled how he had managed to hunt alone through his own ingenuity, regarding him as a son he took pride in. Iris accepted that suggestion. Yuki, however, felt that the situation was far from acceptable. Iris then approached him and requested his assistance for Lord Zero's examination. Kachel quickly intervened, attempting to stop the decision. He pointed out that Yuki was merely a commoner, making his disagreement with the princess's choice clear. Iris responded calmly, noting that her own grandmother was also a commoner. She made it clear that if Kachel looked down on those of common birth, then she too would have no reason to remain. Kachel attempted to justify himself, insisting that what Iris was saying was a different matter, while his own concern was about hierarchy. Iris responded firmly, making it clear that the test was already beyond Kachel's authority. His role was limited to selecting the candidate for the test site, and she reminded him to understand his position. Lord George supported her decision, stating that it was as Her Royal Highness had declared. He then affirmed that Yuki would be ordered to assist in the examination as instructed, assuming that Zero's had no objection. Zero stood behind Yuki, watching him closely before stepping forward. He moved closer and quietly pressured Yuki, warning him not to even consider running away. He reminded Yuki of the difference in their blood and expressed his belief that Yuki was trying to win over the people in the mansion to take his position. He made it clear that the next heir would be himself, not Yuki, and that he intended to shape the house according to his own will. Yuki simply remained there, watching him without reacting. George noticed their interaction and asked what was happening. Zero's dismissed it, presenting it as nothing more than a request for Yuki's help. Nearby, Kachel observed the situation with a sharp, unsettling grin directed at Yuki. Yuki was left standing there, momentarily stunned. Iris then introduced the forest as the location for the test. Burns had already gone ahead into the forest. She explained that the objective of the examination was to reach the other side, while Burns would attempt to obstruct them along the way. The examinees were to overcome him and make their way through to the end. She then presented bracelets to Zero's and Yuki, instructing them to wear them. The items were replicas developed by the Magician Guild, modeled after ancient artifacts. Once equipped, they would activate a boost, after which the test could begin. Kachel stepped forward once again, showing visible excitement. He regarded it as a great honor, noting that ancient items were the legacy of the Elysium Temple and existed beyond normal human understanding. Even as replicas, being able to use them was something he considered a privilege, and his reaction showed that he was deeply impressed. Zero's acknowledged the situation with proper formality, while Yuki followed with the same response, though though his expression remained unchanged. Iris explained that the item they were holding was nothing compared to the real one. She informed them that once it was used, its effect would be lost. Even so, she reminded them not to forget that it was still a product of the Magician Guild's finest engineering. Yuki realized that the bracelet in his hand was a replica of an ancient item. In his time, the Elysium Temple had used holy swords or holy lances instead. He began to wonder if replicas were created because the original artifacts had already been lost. Iris then asked if there were any questions. Yuki raised his hand and questioned why he would be running together with Zero's. Iris explained that it should be seen as a way to compare Lord Zero's strength against someone who generally used ancient magic. Yuki paused at the word, compare. Iris elaborated that running through the forest with a boosted speed would be dangerous. The presence of branches, roots, slippery ground, and wet grass would make movement more difficult, especially at a speed faster than usual, making it harder to avoid obstacles. Yuki acknowledged that her reasoning made sense. Iris gave a small smile toward Yuki and added that if Lord Zero's were to run alone, there would be no clear way to measure his strength. She believed that comparing him to someone unfamiliar with the boost would make the evaluation easier. Yuki accepted that explanation. Zero's, on the other hand, only wanted an opportunity to speak with his brother somewhere without Kachel nearby. He did not mind the idea of leaving the house, even knowing that his brother held resentment toward him. However, Yuki felt uneasy about leaving things unresolved, knowing he would regret it if he failed to clear the misunderstanding. If anything were to happen to Martha and Rumia after his departure, Yuki knew he would come to resent his brother. Both Yuki and Zero's had already put on the bracelets. Iris instructed them to prepare themselves and take their positions, then gave the signal to begin. The two brothers immediately started running. Afterward, Kachel approached Iris and questioned her decision to allow Yuki, a commoner, to participate in the examination. He pointed out that Lord Zero's possessed remarkable magical power, which he himself had helped bring out, and found it inappropriate to compare such a person with a commoner. Iris asked Kachel for his thoughts on the test. Kachel viewed it as an opportunity for the Magician Guild to witness the results of his efforts. Iris questioned what he meant by those results. Kachel explained that the one he had been teaching, Lord Zero's, possessed exceptional strength. Even when faced with powerful beasts, he believed Zero's would push through, even if injured. To Kachel, this was the perfect chance for Her Royal Highness to see the kind of student he had cultivated. Iris then asked whether that was the reason he had recommended such a dangerous mountain as the test site, noting that the one sent to survey the area had reported the danger. Kachel dismissed the concern regarding those who conducted surveys as weak magicians. In his view, power was everything, just as it had been in the Elysium Temple. His words left Iris and the nearby soldiers visibly taken aback. Realizing what he had said, Kachel admitted he had spoken carelessly and acknowledged that the Elysium Temple was a taboo subject. However, the statement had already been made. Iris reminded him that the Elysium Temple had already vanished, and questioned whether he had forgotten that the Magician Guild was founded to ensure such mistakes would never be repeated. Kachel claimed to understand, explaining that he had only been considering what he might do if he could obtain the power once held by the Elysium Temple. Iris silently hoped that the examination would proceed without any further trouble. Meanwhile, as Yuki and Zero's continued running, Yuki attempted to call out to his brother, wanting to speak with him. He tried to continue the conversation while they moved, but Zero's responded only with a cold glance before ignoring him. Yuki urged him to at least listen, trying to keep him from letting anger take control. Zero's, however, dismissed him, convinced that Yuki was planning to take over the house. Yuki was left confused, unable to understand when or how such an intention had ever been formed. Zero's responded by saying that he had heard the maids talking about it. Yuki questioned how he was supposed to know anything about that. Zero's insisted that Sir Kachel had told him that Yuki had been speaking badly about him to the maids. When Yuki asked when that had supposedly happened, Zero's claimed it had been happening constantly, every day, even as recently as the night before. Yuki was completely taken aback. He pointed out that on that particular night, he had been at the inn with Martha, something Zero's should already have been aware of. Zero's refused to listen and shut him down, making it clear that he had no intention of handing over the house. Yuki stated that he had no desire for it in the first place, but Zero's remained convinced that Yuki was constantly undermining him. Yuki then asked to at least be given a chance to explain himself. Zero's questioned him further, asking that if he truly had no intention of taking over the house, then why the princess had singled him out, and how someone like her could even know a commoner like him. Yuki decided to explain everything directly and asked if it was acceptable to speak plainly. Zero's allowed it. Yuki then recounted what had happened at the mountain the other day. During that time, the princess and Burns had been attacked by beasts, and he had stepped in to help them. Afterward, he had left without giving his name. He assumed that they later identified him as the black-haired, black-eyed child from the household. He admitted that he did not know why the princess had called him out, and that was all there was to it. Zeros questioned whether that was truly the full truth. Yuki told him that if he still doubted it, he could confirm it with Burns, the man who carried the axe. Yuki suddenly noticed something unusual. He realized that Zeros was preparing to cast a spell, and he immediately recognized it as ancient magic. Zeros viewed Yuki as someone who had always possessed abilities he himself could not reach. At that moment, Zeros summoned a wind spirit. Yuki steadied himself as he recognized the use of spirit magic, acknowledging that his brother's ability was far from ordinary. He drew his dagger and moved to defend, managing to block each incoming attack one after another. However, he eventually lost his footing and fell. Zeros felt a sense of satisfaction from that moment and continued running ahead, leaving Yuki behind as if he were no longer worth attention. Yuki quickly recovered and felt his frustration begin to rise. He came to the realization that he had been holding himself back, trying to act within limits that no longer made sense to him. At that point, he decided he would not hesitate anymore. The outcome of the exam and the guild no longer mattered to him. From then on, he saw it as a matter within the family. With that resolve, Yuki released a powerful aura and pushed his boost to a higher level. He surged forward with the clear intent of confronting both Zeros and Kachel. Zeros, believing he had already created enough distance, glanced back over his shoulder. To his surprise, Yuki was closing the gap at a rapid pace. Yuki then directed his focus entirely on his brother, rejecting the influence of outside voices and viewing Zeros with sharp intensity, his anger now fully surfacing. Zeros was taken aback, unable to understand how his brother had already closed the gap. Yuki was rapidly catching up to him. Zeros questioned how such speed was even possible. Yuki explained that the replica of the ancient item could change its effect depending on how it was used, and he chose to leave it at that. Zeros looked at the bracelet with disbelief, rejecting the explanation outright. Frustration surfaced as he questioned why Yuki always seems to surpass him. Yuki decided to reveal the truth. He explained that he was a reincarnated magician from 200 years ago, possessing an unusual aptitude for ancient magic. Because of that, both his magic and his boosted speed had doubled. He pressed Zeros to understand, but Zeros dismissed it as nothing more than absurd claims. At that point, both of them came to a stop, and Zeros shut him down, refusing to hear any more. Yuki noted that Zeros had finally met his gaze. Zeros admitted that he had never cared about him in the first place. Yuki acknowledged that, pointing out that it stemmed from Zeros's disdain toward someone like him. Zeros denied that it was about commoners in general and insisted that it was specifically Yuki. He admitted that simply looking at Yuki irritated him. He had set his sights on the Magician Guild for the sake of proving himself, just so he could look back at Yuki from a higher position. To him, both ancient magic and studying had always felt like a burden. He believed that if Yuki had never existed, he would not have had to endure any of it. Yuki took that as if the blame was being placed on him. Zeros shut him down once more and immediately began forming ancient magic. In an instant, he summoned both a wind spirit and a fire spirit, directing them toward Yuki. Zeros drove the summoned Sylph and Salamander forward with the intent of forcing Yuki to submit. Yuki recognized that this was not something he could simply ignore, and instead moved straight toward the spirits. He then questioned whether Zeros truly believed that such summons could defeat Nosferatu. In a swift motion, Yuki cut through the summoned spirits. Zeros was left stunned by what he had just witnessed. Yuki had already expected that summons created through ancient magic would be fast and capable of being cast repeatedly. However, Zeros's opponent at that moment was Nosferatu. Even as Zeros continued to summon spirits again and again, the difference between them remained clear. Yuki had already decided that he would eventually leave the barony. With that in mind, he resolved to settle everything here, to strike down both Kachel and his brother so that he could walk away without regret. As he continued to cut through the summoned spirits, blood began to drip from his body. Even while standing there unfazed, his arm was visibly bleeding. Zeros noticed the injury, his attention drawn to it. Yuki remained firm, having already made it clear that he was Nosferatu. Zeros tightened his grip on the ancient item, still believing Yuki was mistaken. At that moment, memories from their childhood surfaced, a time when Yuki had simply been part of his family. Zeros felt conflicted, unable to fully express what he was trying to say. Before he could gather his thoughts, Yuki suddenly dashed forward. He decided that this would be the end of their conflict, bringing closure to what had become a strained, human-like quarrel between brothers. With decisive force, Yuki struck Zeros in the chest. The impact sent Zeros to the ground, and the ancient item slipped from his grasp and fell aside. Yuki's arm continued to bleed, and the pain was undeniable. Meanwhile, Zeros lay on the ground, coming to the realization that he had never intended to harm his own family, yet had still caused injury to Yuki. Blood stained his own hands as that realization settled in. Yuki then called out to his brother, making his position clear. He had no interest in the house and had stated it many times before. He intended to leave the Grossaria family as Nosferatu. However, he set one condition in his heart. If anything were to happen to Rumia or Martha in the future, he would not forgive Zeros. Burns soon arrived and questioned what the two of them were doing. He made it clear that fighting between examinees was not allowed and pressed them again for an explanation. Yuki quietly reflected on the situation, realizing that this might be the moment everything would come to an end. There was no reason for his brother to cover for him. He thought about saying his farewell to Martha, planning to ask Dyke to buy him some time before leaving. However, Zero stepped forward and explained that it had only been a quarrel between brothers. He took the blame, stating that he had pushed Yuki first, which led to Yuki retaliating and the argument escalating. Yuki was caught off guard by this response. Yuki quietly remarked that Zeros was being foolish, questioning how he could say such a thing when there was something far more dangerous within their house. Zeros responded in the same quiet manner, making it clear that he had no intention of learning any more about what Yuki truly was. Zeros then turned away, searching for the ancient item he had dropped. He repeated that he did not want to know Yuki's true nature, but he was certain of one thing: he could not defeat him. There was a calm acceptance in that realization. He also understood that Yuki had never spoken badly about him. Still, for the sake of protecting their house, he felt he had no choice but to trust Kachel's words. Yuki remarked that his brother was taking things too seriously. Zeros dismissed that lightly, reminding Yuki that he was still his younger brother and should not act on his own without thought. He went on to consider the consequences if Yuki were to disappear. Rumia would be deeply affected, and it would also damage the trust of Her Highness, Iris. As someone who carried the responsibility of protecting their house, Zeros insisted that Yuki should not vanish. Yuki accepted that reasoning, letting out a quiet sigh as he reflected on how troublesome dealing with humans could be. Burns then turned to Zeros and asked whether he intended to continue the test, reminding him that the next stage would require him to face Burns directly in the aptitude trial. Zeros lowered his head and chose to withdraw, deciding that he was not worthy of joining the Magician Guild as he tightened his grip on the ancient item. Burns questioned if he was certain. Zeros affirmed that he had already made his decision. With that, Burns prepared a black arrow as a sign of disqualification and released it into the sky, sending a clear signal to Iris about the outcome. Afterward, Zeros asked Burns if it was true that Yuki had been the one who rescued him earlier. Burns confirmed it immediately. Yuki, hearing the quick response, quietly wished that Burns had at least tried to hide the truth. Burns went on to explain that during that time, they had mistaken Yuki Grossaria for Zeros Grossaria, and that Her Highness had meant no harm. He then expressed his apology to Zeros for the misunderstanding and the trouble it caused. Zeros accepted it without issue. Zeros came to realize that Yuki had never been a threat, and that his suspicions had only come from his own thoughts. Suddenly, a scream echoed through the area, drawing their attention. Zeros recognized the direction as the place where the princess was located. Burns immediately put an end to further discussion and instructed both of them to follow him back to her. Yuki apologized briefly and moved ahead first, dashing forward as the mark on his palm began to glow. As he ran, Yuki found himself unable to shake the image of Iris from his mind, even if she was only someone who resembled another. The thought lingered, reinforcing his belief that dealing with people often brought unnecessary complications. A few minutes earlier, Kachel had noticed a black arrow rising into the sky and quickly understood its meaning, that Lord Zeros had failed the test. The realization left him shaken, questioning how all his efforts had led to this outcome. Meanwhile, Iris anticipated their return, considering that some kind of trouble might have occurred. She thought about the possibility of conducting a re-examination and planned to ask for the details once the three of them arrived. Kachel muttered to himself that Zeros had failed, despite everything he had done. His frustration continued to build as Iris tried to call his attention. In that state, Kachel concluded that they had been wrong all along, believing that even after 200 years, humans were still unable to understand order. He went further, thinking that ignorant people could not be taught, and his thoughts drifted toward the Elysium Temple. At that moment, the surrounding soldiers moved in and confronted him, questioning his actions and pointing out his disrespect toward Her Highness. Kachel quietly began an incantation. Iris immediately recognized what he was doing and warned the soldiers to move away from him. Soon after, Kachel summoned wind and fire spirits repeatedly, reaching a total of 12 summons. The surrounding soldiers were instantly overwhelmed and struck down. Iris fixed her gaze on Kachel as he calmly shifted his intent, moving forward with what he considered his alternative plan. Kachel reflected that relying on a child from a countryside aristocratic family had been a mistake. He even resented his role as a teacher. Iris demanded that he stop at once and reminded him of his identity as the son of the former Prime Minister, Rangel Miguel. She questioned his motives and why he would go this far. Kachel began another incantation, calling forth a beast from the darkness. In response, 3 black creatures with 2 heads each emerged, their forms completely dark as they let out low growls. Iris found the situation unsettling, sensing that Kachel should not possess such overwhelming power. Kachel revealed his resentment, recalling how his father had not chosen him as the heir, instead selecting his illegitimate brother, with the royal family supporting that decision. To Kachel, proving his strength to the royal family had become everything. Compared to that, dealing with a helpless child or a troublesome illegitimate son, and serving as a teacher in a remote aristocratic house, had all felt meaningless and dull. Now, with a member of the royal family present before him, Kachel saw the moment as an opportunity. In his mind, it was time to raise the signal of resurrection and bring back the great Elysium Temple. The Elysium Temple had once been known as the world's first organization of magicians to uncover the legacy of Elysium. They devoted themselves to the study of ancient magic and ancient items, using that power for their own purposes. With such overwhelming strength, they drove out demi-humans and intelligent demons, expanding their territory across the land. In time, the surrounding kings began to fight over those lands, and conflict spread. What might have remained a limited clash instead escalated when the Elysium Temple intervened, turning it into what became known as the Eight Kings' War, the most devastating war in history. In the end, a single wise sage rose and put a stop to the temple's unchecked actions. The ancient items were scattered, and the knowledge of ancient magic was lost. The war came to an end, and the Elysium Temple was believed to have been destroyed. In the present, Iris found herself facing the black beasts. She unleashed a series of fire magic attacks toward them, but the creatures evaded every strike with unnatural speed. Frustration began to build as she struggled to land a hit. Meanwhile, Kachel questioned how the great Elysium Temple could truly have perished, pointing out that one of its ancient items was still in his possession. In his view, those present should feel fortunate, as they were about to witness the return of the great Elysium Temple. The soldiers engaged the black beasts, and one managed to land a direct strike, piercing one of the creatures. However, the attack had no visible effect. Kachel revealed that his original plan had been to send Zeros to the Magician Guild and use him as a means to revive the Elysium Temple. Zeros' naive nature had made it easy to guide him into trusting only Kachel, allowing him to be manipulated without realizing it. Yet, for Kachel, bringing the princess to this place had already been more than enough to move his plan forward. Kachel declared that he would use Iris and turn the barony into the center of the Elysium Temple. At that moment, a voice cut through the scene, putting an end to his words. Above them, Dyke and the other bats hovered in the sky. Iris immediately recognized them as Yuki's bats. They descended swiftly, releasing a barrage of flames toward the black beasts. Both Kachel and the creatures were struck by the attack. Iris was stunned to see the bats using both boost and Efreet blow. The speed and frequency of their attacks made it seem impossible, as they were rapidly unleashing the same ancient magic she had just used. The black beasts were overwhelmed and crushed under the assault, while Kachel managed to shield himself just in time. Iris immediately ordered for Kachel to be seized, but in the next instant, Yuki appeared, telling her not to interfere. Iris acknowledged Yuki's arrival and Kachel let out a strained laugh, unable to accept what he was witnessing. He was shocked that the Baron's illegitimate son was using ancient magic, refusing to believe it and convincing himself that there had to be some mistake. His disbelief turned into open contempt as he continued to insult Yuki, reducing him to nothing more than the Baron's bastard. In the next instant, Yuki moved without hesitation. In a single swift motion, he struck Kachel's hand, and blood burst from the wound. Kachel cried out in pain as the injury took hold. Yuki pressed him, making it clear that he had heard enough and demanding that Kachel repeat the words he had spoken about his family. Kachel forced out the same insult again. Yuki responded that as a tutor, Kachel should be capable of answering a child's question. He moved as if to strike again, but Iris stepped in and stopped him, insisting that Kachel must not be killed. Yuki questioned the reason. Iris explained that there was a strong possibility that Kachel was a follower of the forbidden Elysium Temple. Keeping him alive would allow them to gather more information. Yuki did not waver, reminding her that Kachel had insulted his family. In his previous life, he had only been able to protect Lyle and his family by disappearing. In this life, however, he possessed the strength to protect them directly. Because of that, he resolved to eliminate any threat to his family without hesitation. On top of everything else, Kachel had also harmed the princess, giving Yuki even more reason to see him as someone who had to be dealt with. Kachel continued to provoke him, bringing up how Yuki's own brother had been used and pressing him on what he intended to do about it. He pushed further, claiming that Yuki's brother held resentment toward him. Yuki rejected that idea, placing the blame on Kachel for creating that situation. Kachel continued, insisting that Yuki's brother despised him and wished for his death. Yuki regarded the situation as nothing more than a quarrel between brothers, something natural in his view. He believed that if his brother were ever to seriously face Nosferatu, it would only push him to become stronger. However, Yuki made it clear in his mind that he could not forgive Kachel for using his family. His thoughts narrowed down to a single conclusion, and he prepared to eliminate Kachel without hesitation. Just as he was about to act, Kachel activated the replica of an ancient item. Using it as a catalyst, he cast the summoning onto the ground, and a powerful wind surged as a magic circle formed beneath them. Iris immediately recognized it as an ancient magic summoning. Yuki noticed the feather being used as the catalyst, realizing that he had seen something like it before. He tried to recall its origin, wondering if it belonged to a cockatrice, but quickly dismissed the thought as the presence felt far greater. A moment later, a griffin appeared, its form towering as it took shape. The sight alone caught Yuki off guard. Kachel seemed satisfied, acknowledging the result as expected. The griffin soared into the sky. Kachel identified the feather as one once used by a priest of the Elysium Temple. With that, his intent became clear as he prepared to eliminate everyone present and capture the princess. The soldiers immediately reacted, their attention sharpening at the threat. The commander issued orders to prioritize the princess's protection. Iris responded by casting Efreet blow toward the griffin, but Kachel raised a barrier that shielded both himself and the creature, completely blocking the attack. As Yuki observed the scene, he reflected that ancient magic was undeniably powerful, but something about it felt unnatural. If Kachel truly possessed this level of magical power, then by all logic, he should have already been recognized as a high-level magician within the guild. Kachel mounted the griffin and ordered it to slaughter the soldiers below. The creature ascended higher into the sky as it prepared to strike. Yuki quickly warned everyone to stay alert, pointing out the danger of the griffin's claws and hind legs. He noted that because of the way Kachel was riding it, the creature could not maintain proper posture to use its beak effectively. He also observed that if they were to attack, striking beneath its wings would be the best approach. Iris questioned how Yuki possessed such detailed knowledge. Yuki attributed it to information he had received from a friend. Accepting that, Iris immediately directed the soldiers to form up and raise their shields while she prepared to attack with her magic. Yuki recalled that griffin feathers were often used in magical research, and because of that, he had hunted them before. As the griffin descended toward the soldiers' formation, Yuki moved in and intercepted the attack just in time. Kachel reacted with frustration, directing his anger toward Yuki, seeing him as someone who constantly interfered. Iris launched another Efreet blow, but the griffin climbed higher into the sky, evading the attack with ease. Iris realized that striking a flying griffin directly would be extremely difficult. From above, Kachel declared that they were witnessing the legacy of the Elysium Temple, rejecting the idea of it being considered taboo. He made it clear that anyone who opposed him would have to defeat him first. Yuki accepted that challenge and immediately began moving. Iris questioned his next action as he prepared to act. Yuki decided to use one of the soldiers as a stepping point. Using the soldier's back, he launched himself high into the air toward the griffin. Kachel viewed the move as reckless, believing Yuki was overestimating himself simply because he could use ancient magic. He assumed that by changing direction mid-flight, Yuki would be unable to keep up. While airborne, Yuki called upon his familiars, ordering them to gather. The bats quickly responded and assembled beneath him. Using them as footholds, Yuki stepped across their backs. As he landed briefly, he instructed Dyke to hold steady, and with that support, he leaped again. This time, he successfully landed on the griffin's back. He made his presence known, leaving Kachel visibly shaken and unable to comprehend what had just occurred. Yuki accepted the label that had been thrown at him, acknowledging it without hesitation. To him, magic was something that should only be used when there was absolute certainty that the attack would hit its target. With that in mind, he placed his hand on the griffin's body and released Efreet blow. The impact scorched the creature, and it cried out in pain as its body burned. Unable to stay airborne, the griffin descended rapidly and crashed to the ground. Yuki followed after, landing safely. He realized that this was his first time fighting midair using his own body, and somehow he had managed to make it work. One of the soldiers observed what had happened and was deeply impressed, noting that Yuki had used ancient magic at such close range. The praise continued, recognizing that someone with that level of power was rare, even within the Magician Guild, and wondering where such strength had come from. Yuki approached Kachel, who was lying on the ground. Just as he was about to reach out, Iris stopped him from making contact. Iris assessed Kachel's condition, noting that he was already severely injured. His magic had been completely depleted from the force summoning, leaving him unable to stand. His life was also at risk. Yuki understood the implication of her words and interpreted it as a reason not to finish him. Iris then made her decision clear, declaring that Kachel would be taken back to the Magician Guild and face proper punishment. She emphasized that it was not worth staining the hands of someone who could become a future magician, firmly settling the matter. Yuki was momentarily taken aback, noticing that Iris held an expression similar to someone he knew. After a brief pause, he accepted her decision. Meanwhile, Kachel attempted to summon a fire spirit once more, but nothing responded. He realized that his magic had been exhausted. Confusion and frustration surfaced as he questioned why he could never rise beyond the role of a mere tutor, despite believing that he had the necessary ability. At that moment, Burns arrived at the scene, carrying Zeros on his back. He quickly assessed the situation and noted that Zeros was in pain.